Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. This is a special event for me, certainly to bring a little of Sacramento to San Bruno, and on this very important issue. I wanted to begin by asking for a moment of silence tonight, just to remember those certainly who we lost on September 9th. They'll never be out of our thoughts and prayers, but also to remember those who lost their lives at Pearl Harbor, today being December 7th, and in 1941 in Pearl Harbor Day, and to honor all of our veterans. So if you would join me for just a moment of silence, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. Also, this evening, we wanted to have the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag, and we're joined tonight by Lieutenant Colonel Wong, who is a resident of San Mateo County, was recognized as the 2007 Marine Corps Times Marine of the Year. His current assignment is officer in charge of the Peacetime Wartime Support Team based in Alameda, California. One of their duties includes coordinating assistance between civilian authorities, FEMA, police, fire, and the military during emergencies. We thought it would be appropriate on the remembrance of Pearl Harbor on the topic of tonight's meeting that we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Lieutenant Colonel, if you'd be.
Thank you, sir. Will you all please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you very much for that. We have members of the San Bruno City Council with us this evening. I saw Michael Salazar in the back, and I think other ones are going. It's the Canabera is here, Councilmember Canabera also, so and certainly the mayor, who will be speaking in a couple of minutes. This has always been, as you know, an exceptional community. Your strength and your character were on display as the world watched as you helped your neighbors throughout this tragedy. You were there for them every minute of the day. I'm sensitive to the fact that we're all at different stages of dealing with this disaster. 8 people were killed, many more injured, dozens of homes were destroyed and damaged, and some people are still hospitalized, as we know, and others are in need of counseling. Even though it may take months for the NTSB to finalize their investigation, many issues have been identified within our state's natural gas infrastructure since the September 9th explosion. Now, the purpose of this forum tonight is twofold. One, to provide the public with an opportunity to learn more about the future of natural gas lines in your neighborhoods and what's being done to ensure their safety. Also, to provide members of the legislature with an overview of the San Bruno incident as we prepare to consider legislative and regulatory reforms to ensure that a disaster like this never happens again. The timing of this forum is important because the legislative session just started yesterday in Sacramento, which gives us an opportunity to introduce reforms to improve the safety of our aging pipeline infrastructure. Now, the information we learned tonight will help all of the legislators here at the forum as they return to the Capitol and review the various proposals during the coming year. And before we start the agenda, I wanted to thank my colleagues for participating and give them an opportunity to say a few opening remarks. We're honored to have 2 chairs of Assembly committees with us this evening. First of all is the chair of the Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee, Stephen Bradford. Stephen?
Good afternoon. Good evening. I just want to thank Mr. Hill, my colleague, for pulling this town hall together on this important issue, and as stated earlier at the press conference, is to determine what happened on September 9th, not necessarily to point fingers, but to understand what happened and what we can do better. And as my colleague, Mr. Hill, has stated, he has introduced a bill that will be addressing pipeline safety. But in addition to making sure that safety is the #1 priority in this community and anywhere in the state of California, we got to make sure that as these repairs are being made and these upgrades are being made, that you as a ratepayer aren't held responsible for making these infrastructure improvements on a regular basis for these utilities who are making tremendous profits day to day. So we might have to look at some rate reform. That's a great concern of mine, and making sure that as profits are being made, they're reinvesting in infrastructure, and as they present their rate cases to the PUC and make an argument for money for improvement, maybe we should look at making sure they make the repairs first, then reimbursing the utilities versus paying them first. So these are some of the things that we're going to look at, and we hope to have some lively discussion from our panelists who are here, who are some of the leading experts on ruptures and pipelines across the nation, and hopefully we can make some tremendous improvements on how we do pipeline and gas delivery here in the state of California. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm happy to be joined by my colleagues, and congratulate the mayor for his great leadership in this very, very difficult time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Thank you, Mr. Bradford. And we're fortunate also to have the chair of the Assembly Public Safety Committee, the Honorable Tom Ammiano.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And it is truly an honor and very humbling to be here. I did visit the site. I don't imagine it's a place that anybody can really get used to. It's a hell of a way to celebrate Christmas. But I did get the sense of hope. I did get the sense of some miracles that can be worked. Unfortunately, we can't bring those people back. We can't bring those homes back. We can't bring the family structure that once existed, the security that people must have felt in that beautiful neighborhood. I think that is irreparably damaged. But there is a future, and I am very, very distressed at what I see, and I'm waiting to be proven wrong about an arrogance around a cavalier, almost inhuman accountability issue here and oversight. You know, we have the CPUC. I felt that their testimony in Sacramento in front of another committee was wanting. I think that this is an issue that cannot go away. When talking to the press, I mentioned the tremendous mental health issues that are now going to visit this community, and the tremendous support that all you give each other. You're representing that extended family that can help assuage the tremendous loss and grief. I hope to get some new information tonight. I hope to help translate that information into something that will be long range and effective. We're still having gas explosions here in California, so that means a solution has not been found, and I want to really hold the people accountable who should have had those solutions in mind before this tragedy happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ammiano. We're also fortunate to have Assemblymember Paul Fong, who represents Silicon Valley just to the south of us, who also sits on the Utilities and Commerce Committee. Assemblymember Fong.
I'll first thank Jerry Hill for putting this town hall together. It's very important that pipeline safety issues are very important to me, because if Silicon Valley goes down, you know, we're going to be out of business for a while. Also, I serve on the Utilities and Commerce Committee, and Jerry Hill's got 2 bills that's going to be going before us that will address part of this issue, and I'm here to understand those bills, and thank you for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. I appreciate your attendance tonight, as well as our other members. What we're going to do is we have a panel discussion. You've seen the agenda. We'd like to keep the comments from the panelists to about 10 minutes, which will allow enough time for our questions as well as questions that you may have. And if you do have questions, what I'd like, there will be cards that you have available. And if you would be kind enough to fill out your question on the card, and staff members are walking around, if you could hand them to them, and then they'll bring them up and we will ask those questions for you to keep it moving, hopefully, so that all of the questions can be asked and that we can get as much information out to everyone, including us, I wish we had all of the answers, but we don't, and that's why we're here tonight. I think the experts we have will be helpful in identifying some of the issues that we need to look at in the future. So I'd like to start with the agenda and kind of an overview of San Bruno's recovery efforts from your great mayor, Mayor Jim Ruane.
Thank you, and welcome to San Bruno, Assemblyman Hill, our good and effective member from San Mateo County. And welcome to the other members of the California Assembly, and thank you for having me speak here tonight. My name is Jim Ruane. The past 3 months have shown that San Bruno is a determined town that will triumph over tragedy because of the special sense of family, neighborhood, and community that the city was known for long before that tragic September night. I am very proud to be the mayor of this wonderful city. The facts and statistics of this devastating incident are now well known. A 30-inch high-pressure natural gas line lying under Glenview Drive broke apart. The explosion knocked out a city water main line, ignited flames of 2,000 degrees over 100 feet high, and sent our residents of this previously quiet residential neighborhood running for their lives. 38 homes were destroyed and another 58 were damaged, some 17 seriously. 66 persons were injured, and most tragically, 8 persons lost their lives. 38 homes, again. In total, 55 families are still displaced from their homes and their neighborhoods. That evening, over 400 police and fire personnel from throughout San Mateo County and, in fact, the Bay Area fought the fire and evacuated neighborhoods on both sides of Crestmore Canyon. Our own water services staff dragged fire hoses from active hydrants over 3,000 feet away. Residents rescued their neighbors and transported them to hospitals so that emergency medical crews and personnel could focus on the most seriously injured. The actions of these responders and many of our residents were nothing short of heroic. But the story of our community response and resilience did not stop there. Less than 72 hours following the explosion, the city had completed inspections of the 377 homes in the Glenview neighborhood and had set up a residential reentry program and were escorting families back to their homes. Thankfully, most were able to return to their homes and move towards normalcy. Many others, way too many, have not been able to do so. Within weeks, demolition of the destroyed homes was completed and debris had been removed so that the area could be made ready for rebuilding and restoration of the tight-knit neighborhood. Caring for the immediate needs of the community and planning for longer-term recovery has been the city's #1 priority. The evening of the fire, we opened an overnight emergency evacuation center, and by the next day, we had established a local assistance center where residents could get information and resources to sustain themselves and to begin rebuilding their lives. Now, city staff has mobilized to provide ongoing direct outreach, support, and assistance to residents most directly impacted through a team of staff liaisons. We are coordinating with a network of governmental and nonprofit organizations to provide informational forums and support in resolving a variety of issues related to insurance, taxes, property valuation, mental health, and others. While residents are now actively repairing the more minor damage, we expect to begin processing applications for reconstruction soon after the first of the year. The challenges in front of the city and our residents remain massive. Fortunately, we are continuing to be blessed with an outpouring of generosity from throughout the community and the region. As our residents work to rebuild their lives in their neighborhood, and as the investigation into this tragic incident occurs, we are all conscious of the need to ensure that our neighborhoods are safe and that gas lines that run through our communities are maintained and operated in a manner that ensures that what happened here never happens again, anywhere. Tragically, San Bruno residents now know the critical nature of pipeline inspections and maintenance, and they are understandably concerned. They want, while knowing that there can be no guarantees, everything possible done to protect them and their homes and their neighborhoods. Pipeline operators must undertake and regulatory agencies must enforce the most stringent pipeline inspection programs possible. Our residents must be provided information on the inspections and the programs, and that is both understandable and in a usable form. Any proposed pipeline legislation must primarily target further pipeline safety. Similarly, our residents expect strong regulatory oversight that is both firm and uncompromising, and both transparent and understandable. Also, our residents expect detailed operator emergency response plans and protocols be made available to our city police and fire first responders. Our police and fire personnel must be prepared to coordinate immediately with the operator should any incident occur in the future. Relevant information on the status of the system and risk assessments cannot be withheld from the emergency first responders. We look forward to your continued interest and legislative participation in resolving many issues that remain in front of us. I thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for your support and, in fact, your prayers for the city of San Bruno. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again for your leadership throughout this past few months. It's been extraordinary, outstanding, and uncompromising, so thank you very much. Now we'll move on to our first panel, if we could, to keep things moving. I also wanted to announce, if you'd like to have a seat up in front, that the Vice Mayor of the City of San Bruno, Rico Medina, is here. Rico, thank you very much for being with us tonight. So what we can we have an order that starting out, we have certain, as you can see, Mr. Kirk Johnson, Vice President, Gas Engineering and Operations from Pacific Gas and Electric. He'll be our first speaker. And then we'll have questions for him. And then Mr. Paul Clannon, who's the Executive Director on the far right, your left, of the California Public Utilities Commission. And then in the center is California Public Utilities Commission Division of Ratepayer Advocates, Dave Ashukian, Deputy Director for Energy of the CPUC. So, Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here, and appreciate your testimony and your forthrightness. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Bradford, Chairman Damiano, and members of the Utilities, Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee and Assembly Committee on Public Safety. My name is Kirk Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Gas Engineering and Operations for Pacific Gas and Electric Company, or PG&E. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this joint informational hearing on the subject of natural gas transmission, safety, and vulnerability. This hearing and others like it are important forums to discuss improvements that we can make to our gas pipeline safety in California. PG&E is determined to learn from the San Bruno accident and to prevent anything like it from occurring again, and we know that many others share this view. The first topic that you asked me to talk about and address is what happened on the day in San Bruno. In the early evening of September 9th, a pipeline rupture occurred on PG&E's natural gas transmission line, line 132, which runs through the Crestmore neighborhood of San Bruno, California. 8 people lost their lives. Many others were seriously injured, and 37 homes were destroyed. Many households were forced to evacuate. PG&E continues to work with the National Transportation Safety Board and the California Public Utilities Commission to determine what happened and to complete this investigation. The NTSB has issued a preliminary report on October 13th of 2010. It contains additional information on the San Bruno incident, and it's available on their website. Pending the conclusion of the NTSB investigation, PG&E is not able to comment on the cause or the causes of this tragic event. Immediately after September 9th, PG&E took the following steps to ensure the safety of our gas transmission system throughout our service territory. First, we leak surveyed all of the pipelines that feed the San Francisco Peninsula. Second, we reduced the pipeline pressure into the pipelines that serve the San Francisco Peninsula. We conducted a leak survey, both aerial and on-foot patrol of our entire gas transmission system. And we have released public information on PG&E's pipeline safety and maintenance practices, including some of the tools that we use in our engineering analysis to determine future maintenance practices and planning. In addition, we are reviewing our safety procedures concerning our natural gas system with first responders and in various communities throughout our service territory. We are sharing detailed maps and are in the process of sharing graphical information systems to those first responders. In terms of PG&E's real estate programs, something else that you've asked us to discuss tonight, I'm going to briefly go over some of the activity that PG&E's been involved with in San Bruno. You've asked me to describe the real estate programs and how it's impacted San Bruno. First, it's important to understand that the real estate programs in San Bruno are part of an overall effort for the San Bruno community. To date, these efforts include establishing the Rebuild San Bruno Fund for upward $100 million, which was used to provide both immediate and long-term support to San Bruno residents and the city for three primary purposes. First, to provide direct emergency assistance in the form of cash disbursements for immediate expenses not covered by insurance. Second, to ensure that residents are reimbursed for costs or losses that may not be covered by insurance. And third, to provide financial assistance to the city of San Bruno for certain costs it incurs as it responds to this accident, and to rebuild and repair public infrastructure. Other efforts include providing residents in the impacted area with immediate support in the form of housing, clothing, and financial assistance such as $1,000 prepaid debit cards, and distributing checks to hundreds of households in the amount of $15,000, $25,000, and $50,000, depending on the extent of the damage that the households experienced. Residents were not asked to waive any potential claims in order to receive this assistance. Our real estate programs themselves are made up of three elements. The first is the Rebuild and Repurchase Program. This program is intended to help eligible residents to either rebuild their homes or to relocate instead of rebuilding their homes and sell their property to a company PG&E has established for this purpose. The second is the Neighborhood Restoration Plan. This program is designed to provide those living in the affected area, those homes were not substantially damaged by the September 9th accident, with cash for landscaping and hardscaping around their homes. And third, the Value Assurance Program. This program was created so that eligible residents who decide to move, that they do not suffer a loss from the fair market value prior to the incident. In terms of other activities that I have been asked to address today, I want to talk about how PG&E interacts with the CPUC. In terms of, through its General Order 112E, the CPUC provides regulatory oversight over PG&E's pipeline safety, including auditing and inspection activities. The Commission has adopted the Federal Pipeline Regulatory Safety Standards, CFR 49, Parts 190, 191, 192, 193, and 199, including all revisions. The CPUC has supplemented the federal requirements with additional requirements that go beyond and above what currently is federal law. Thus, PG&E interacts with the CPUC in matters concerning public safety, pipeline safety, and inspections on a regular basis. The CPUC regularly audits and inspects PG&E's gas and electric operations. In 2009, the CPUC conducted 12 audits and is expected to complete 16 audits in 2010. In some instances, in some of those audits, the CPUC has findings for which PG&E responds, and often by agreeing with the CPUC to the findings and making improvements to our work and our safety procedures. Beginning in 2002, the Pipeline Safety Act implemented federal laws which require gas transmission pipeline operators to initiate a multi-year process of conducting baseline integrity assessments of transmission lines in high consequence areas. Those are areas of higher population density with 20 or more dwellings, public gathering places, or structures difficult to evacuate, such as nursing homes and hospitals. The CPUC is the primary regulator overseeing PG&E's efforts to comply with this federal law and its state analog, General Order 112E. PG&E's baseline assessment, which is on track to be completed before December 17th, 2012, is well underway. Through August of this year, and pursuant to federal law and General Order 112E, PG&E is performing baseline integrity management assessments on approximately 737 of its 1,021 miles of HCA pipeline miles. In performing these baseline integrity management assessments, PG&E uses one of three federally authorized assessment methods: inline inspections, also known as pigging, direct assessment, and pressure testing. Through August of this year, approximately 156 miles have been assessed using the inline inspection method, or pigging. Approximately 567 miles have been assessed using direct assessment, and approximately 14 miles have been assessed using pressure testing. Many times, the CPUC brings concerns to PG&E's attention. Other times, the opposite happens. PG&E identifies a concern on its own and brings it to the CPUC's attention and works with the CPUC to address the problem. You have asked me to comment on one such instance where PG&E brought a problem to the CPUC's attention and worked with the CPUC to rectify it. In 2007, PG&E determined that a leak surveyor, one of our field employees in one of our 18 divisions, had falsified records. PG&E took swift disciplinary action, including the termination of the employee and the termination of the management level employees, who share accountability for that activity. This was an uncommon event and in no way reflects the integrity of the vast majority of our employees. Nonetheless, upon discovery, PG&E immediately developed a plan of corrected action, including a complete resurvey of the involved division. At the same time, PG&E found opportunities to improve consistency, tools and processes, and training in survey techniques. As part of this quality improvement process, PG&E introduced an enhancement, uniform leak survey, grading criteria, and other enhancements to significantly improve the consistency of our leak survey detection. A final report from the NTSB and a conclusive set of findings are likely months down the road. In the meantime, we will continue to do everything we can to cooperate and support the NTSB investigation. That said, we're not going to wait for a final report to take what we believe are appropriate steps. This past October, PG&E announced an initiative to advance gas pipeline safety and facility safety throughout its service territory and throughout the nation. Pipeline 2020 is a new program to guide the utility's efforts to strengthen the natural gas pipeline system and advance industry best practices through a combination of targeted investments, research and development, improved process and procedures, and tighter coordination with public agencies. The program will focus on 5 major areas. The first is to modernize our critical pipeline infrastructure. The second is to expand the use of automatic and remote control valves. The third is to spur the development of the next generation of inspection technologies for gas transmission pipelines. The fourth is to develop industry-leading practices. And the fifth is to enhance our public safety partnerships. Pipeline 2020 is a forward-looking and includes initiatives that will be years in the planning and execution. PG&E will, of course, work collaboratively with our regulators and our stakeholders as it develops and implements this program. Thank you for allowing me the time for my opening remarks, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And what we'll do is have the full panel make their comments, and then we'll have some questions from the panel here, and then we'll take some of the comments and questions from the audience before we go into the next panel. So, Mr. Clannon, welcome.
Mr. Hill, thank you very much, and members of the panel. I want to make sure, can you hear me? Is this thing on? I want to welcome my Assemblymember Ma, who I know came in. Thank you. I'm Paul Clannon. I'm the Executive Director at the Public Utilities Commission, at the State Public Utilities Commission. I stood up here because you need to see the people who are working for you. I'm one of those people. You need to judge what I'm about to say from the standpoint that I work for you, and that's a standard that you need to hold us to. I know that's a standard that the legislature is going to hold us to. I also want you to know that the Public Utilities Commission, although we're a state agency, we're actually headquartered in San Francisco. We're one of only 2 agencies that is, for good historical reasons. That means that a lot of us live here. There are Public Utilities Commission employees living in San Bruno. I see some here in the audience, some PUC retirees. One of the people killed on September 9th, along with her teenage daughter, was my friend Jackie, who worked in natural gas safety at the Public Utilities Commission for 20 years. I say that not as a plea for sympathy, but as a reminder to you people, the ones who have suffered day by day here in San Bruno, that it's not business as usual that you're getting from the Public Utilities Commission. We're doing a professional job in responding to what happened on September 9th, but it's personal. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Johnson said or your good mayor, Jim Ruane, said about what happened on September 9th. That night, a Public Utilities Commission investigator was on scene here dealing with your first responders, the fire department, the police department. Our role when there's an incident like this is immediately to arrive on scene and make sure that evidence that's going to be needed for the investigation is preserved. That's what our investigator did beginning just a couple of hours after the explosion that night. Our investigator was here. I saw him the next morning at about 7 a.m. I know that he had been on scene here until about 4:30 Friday morning. He then linked up with the National Transportation Safety Board folks who flew out Friday afternoon to begin the actual official investigation. The dividing line, the division of labor between the state and the federal government in pipeline safety is this. The standards are set at the federal level. We participate in the setting of those standards, and I expect one result of what we learned from the incident here in San Bruno is recommendations back up to the federal level for tightened federal regulation. I know Mr. Hill is thinking along those lines already in his state legislation. So our role is to help establish those guidelines at the federal level and then to enforce them here at the state level. I've got 9 natural gas inspectors who enforce those federal guidelines for the entire state of California. I'm going to come back to that number and what it means and what those folks do in a few minutes, but I want you to have that number in your head. So the way the division of labor works is the states, including California, we are the ones who enforce the federal guidelines. The members of the panel have given some questions that they want me to cover. I'm going to sort of tick off answers to those questions. I'll be here to answer questions, your questions later, and I know I'll get some from the panel as well. So I know I've got about 15 minutes or so and probably just 10 minutes or so left. So I'm going to start ticking off some answers to questions. It may seem a little bit disjointed, and that's why I just want to say I'll be here to answer questions that with a better flow. What did the PUC do in response to what happened on September 9th? I mentioned that we began our investigation. We also took immediate steps within the first few hours, within the first couple of days of the explosion, to direct PG&E to take the steps that Mr. Johnson laid out, to lower the pressure, not just on the line that exploded, but lines that were interconnected with it. That pressure remains low now to ensure the safety of the people who live near those pipelines until we at the Public Utilities Commission, until the folks at PG&E, until your representatives, your elected representatives are satisfied that they can be used safely. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. So immediately the PUC directed PG&E to lower that pressure. We also directed PG&E to do an immediate survey of all of its natural gas transmission facilities. You heard Mr. Johnson talk about that effort. That's a highly technical effort that involves things like aerial flybys. People sometimes chuckle when I say that one way to inspect a natural gas transmission line is to fly over it, but it's no joke. You can fly over a transmission line and look down with very sophisticated imaging and other kinds of techniques to see if there's dead vegetation along the right-of-way. If there is, you send somebody there. Lots of gas leaks from transmission lines have been found early and headed off before they were created a dangerous situation because of those flyovers. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how often that was done for the line that exploded just a mile or so that way. The way the Public Utilities Commission effort works is that we rely on the utilities to do the primary inspections. I said that we have 9 people to cover the entire state. That means, and by the way, this is not unusual, this is not unique to California. This is the way it's done across all the United States in the main. No state does the primary inspection of natural gas transmission lines, and there's a very good reason for that. It takes hundreds and hundreds of people to do that, to make sure that the transmission lines are safe. PG&E has many people specially trained to operate and inspect their transmission lines. So does Southern California Gas Company, so does San Diego Gas and Electric. We'll be talking in an effort, I know, led by the legislature, about the proper role of the Public Utilities Commission going forward and whether it should be more expansive. But I want people to understand that we got 9 people now. We, by the way, are hiring 4 new inspectors, and they'll be working at the PUC in the next few weeks. That'll give me a total of 13 inspectors to cover an entire state. If we're starting to talk about the possibility of the state government taking over the primary inspection from the utilities, that could be hundreds. That's a debate I'm willing to have, a discussion I'm willing to have, but we need to be realistic, about what the possibilities are there. What do you do with your 9 people? What you do is you make sure that the utility has a pipeline safety program that works, that the utility itself is finding problems with its pipelines, reporting those problems to the regulator, and getting them fixed. You heard Mr. Johnson give an example or two of how that works. The way that you do that is to establish firm oversight, but cooperative oversight with the operators of the pipelines. The way we do that in particular is we send people out to audit, to do field investigations and office investigations of the utility's own pipeline safety programs. The line that exploded was audited by the Public Utilities Commission in 2008. Ironically, there was an audit going on at the time of the explosion. The audit was still being written up at the time of the explosion. So that's the way it works. The utility companies, the ones who operate the pipelines, they're the ones who have the trained many dozens of people to do the day-by-day inspections, and the regulator comes and makes sure that that effort works. And I hope to make some progress in convincing Chairman Amiano that this is a system that works and can work better tonight as we discuss that. What did we do with Line 132? I mentioned that there were flyovers in the months preceding. There were several flyovers. There were also several actual day-by-day, actually people on the ground moving along that pipeline to check for leaks and to check for other problems in the year or two leading up to the explosion. This was not a line that was ignored. It's not a line where people were looking the other way. It's a line where something like state-of-the-art inspections were being conducted routinely up until the time of the explosion. That concerns me. What that tells me is nobody can be complacent about the mechanisms that we have in place now. The federal regulations, the way the states enforce them, the inspection techniques that we're using, none of us involved in this at the regulatory side or at the operating side can be complacent that we've got it right. And if we keep one thing in mind, if we have one thing in our heads as we talk about all the many issues tonight and during the course of this legislative session and during the work at the Public Utilities Commission, there's one thing I hope we keep in mind. It is that at the end of it, we have to have a better system at the federal level and enforced here at the state. What are the safety records of the utilities? As I said, we have a statewide program. We look at Pacific Gas and Electric Company, we look at Southern California Gas Company, we look at San Diego Gas and Electric Company. These are highly complex systems, and when I'm often asked the question, whose system is safer? Whose system has more accidents? Whose system has fewer accidents? It's actually very difficult to answer those questions. You look at the number of leaks that get reported. You look at the number of incidents where people didn't have the right training to be operating a valve. You can total all those up, and they tell you a story. You can look at the number of accidents that happen on the different systems. They tell you a different story. When we look at all of that at the Public Utilities Commission, what we conclude is all the utilities in California are sort of roughly at the same level of safety. We can debate plus and minus about that, and we may get into that a bit tonight, but I don't want people to feel like PG&E somehow gets a free ride. It doesn't. PG&E's gas pipeline safety program is very comparable to the ones throughout the state. And by the way, that's the pipeline safety program that I just got through saying we can't be complacent about. So those procedures, those enforcement mechanisms have to get better across the whole state and likely across the whole country. There's been a lot in the press about the rate-making process, and I know it's on people's minds. I know it's on Chair Bradford's mind in particular. And we're going to be having a lot of discussions about that, I think, during the legislative session. Let me just lay out the facts for you without putting a lot of my own opinion on it, and then, let's talk. The way regulation works in California and throughout the country is the public utility comes into its regulator, to the PUC here in California, and it says for pipeline safety, for maintenance, for replacement, I need X dollars in the next year. There's a very legalistic process. There's lawyers involved and hearing rooms and judges. And at the end of it, the PUC looks at the evidence and says yes or no. Says, yeah, you needed that much, or no, you needed more, or no, you needed less. Then the utility goes off and operates its system. We've talked a lot, and you've read in the press about the so-called list of 100 that the PUC directed PG&E to make public after the explosion. That was so you could see how this effort works and form your own opinions about it. PG&E as a routine management measure in operating its system, and not just PG&E but the other utilities as well, keeps a list of work that needs to be done. Sometimes it's very mundane stuff. Sometimes it's just an extra inspection they want to do. It can go all the way up to replacing valves, all the way up to replacing pipes. As time goes by, PG&E and the other utilities will reorder things on that list. There's an example of that's been much written about in the press about a part of line 132, that's the line that blew up, that's about 3 miles that way. It's about 3 miles north, that was on PG&E's list, and then it was off PG&E's list, and now it's back on PG&E's list. When I tell people that, they think that that's a scandal and a problem. It may well not be. What it may represent, and it's a good question to ask PG&E, is that they went out and got more information about that section of pipeline and decided, given the money that they had from rates and their own view of pipeline safety, that it was better to go and work on another section first and then come back. And I think you'll find that's exactly what happened with that stretch of pipe. Does anybody go back after all of this and check to make sure that PG&E did that work? The answer is no.
You know, I'm going to have to break my own rule here. I'm hearing something now that I find hard to believe. And that is that when you look at that line that we're talking about, 1.8 miles, line 132, 1.8 miles north of the site of the incident, and I have the capital project report that was done in 2007 that stated they needed $5 million to make that repair and that it was of high risk. And then we look at the same, that was in 2007. And then you look at 2008, PG&E did their own assessment that said it was not of high risk, that it did not reach that standard. So they took the $5 million, which our legislation will try and change, but it said, based upon the person's review of the information, his own observations, and his engineering judgment, and knowing that PG&E was going to be performing another ECDA later that year or next year, he determined that the work did not need to be done as previously scheduled. So that was the work in 2007 was said it needed to be done as it was and I can read the actual words. It was the project was identified and prioritized by PG&E's risk management program to lower the risk. So that was in 2007. 2008 it was fine, but then in 2009 already all of a sudden the same pipe that you're talking about is now, it says if the replacement of this pipe does not occur, risks associated with this segment will not be reduced, coupled with the consequences of failure of this section of pipeline. The likelihood of a failure makes the risk of a failure at this location unacceptably high. That's in South San Francisco, 1.8 miles north of this explosion site. So 2007, it was a problem. 2008, all of a sudden, it's not a problem. And 2009, it's an unacceptably high problem. Yet they got $5 million for this in 2007, and they're getting another $5 million to fix it in 2009. So the question that I have is, number one, did anyone know or find out what they were doing with those funds, the $5 million? Is there a criteria, a protocol established, a triage to know where those funds were allocated? And is the priority greater at that other site than what was established at this point? And if not, why aren't those established criteria? And does PG&E, and I'll talk to Mr. Johnson about Mr. Johnson about that, ask him that question later. But you're telling me that this is normal, or this is fine to do that. I'm wondering how in 3 years a pipe can go from risk, no risk, and unacceptably high risk.
Well, I think we do need to hear from PG&E about why they made that management judgment. Where I was about to go there was saying, does anybody go back and check to see if that particular work was done? And the answer I was about to say was no. This is a hole in the PUC's regulation process between rate making and the actual work that happens after rate making that we'll be moving to correct. I know it's also a subject of your legislation, and I think that's a very positive step forward. I think. And so where did the money go? I'll just repeat it because, yeah. And so where did the money go?
All right. I'm sorry, sir. Sir, thank you, John. I apologize.
And I'll ask my own question, where did the money go, and then I'll answer it. The money went to other pipeline maintenance, other pipeline projects. PG&E didn't pocket that money. PG&E spent it on other pipeline projects. I think it's entirely reasonable.
But the question is, Mr. Clannon, how do we know where that money went, and was that a greater priority than the problem that was identified in 2007 in South San Francisco?
Yeah, and I think that's where more transparency and more oversight is required. I acknowledge that, and the PUC is moving forward to do that as well. And I know that's the subject of your legislation. I think that's a really positive. That's a really positive step. That's a different thing from saying that PG&E took the money and did something else with it. It had nothing to do with pipeline safety.
But you don't know that that's true or not?
Well, we know that they spent it on pipelines.
I'm sorry. I've been acting irresponsibly up here to getting excited, so I wanted to make sure. So I don't want to, in terms of asking the questions out of line here, but so.
Yeah. So I don't quite know how to go from here, Mr. Hill. I know this is a question that the legislature will be asking the PUC. I'm expecting to answer that question in much more formal ways, with work papers and so on about how we know that. But so maybe I've gone as far as I can go with that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
It'll be pursued. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I expect that I'm out of time. I should stop there. I know there are going to be a lot of questions for the PUC, both from the panel and from the folks from San Bruno here. I want to say thank you for listening. You're holding us to the right standard, and so is the legislature. We're not afraid to be held to that standard. We think that we've been doing a good job. That doesn't mean that we can't do better, and we want to be part of the discussion here and at the federal level so that we can all do a better job of pipeline safety, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clannon. And while Mr. Ajoukian gets ready to make his comments, I do want to introduce the Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, the Honorable Fiona Ma. Thanks, Fiona, for being here this evening. Thanks for your interest, and I know it's great, so thank you.
Yep,
Mr. Ajoukian, thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name is David Shukian. I'm the Deputy Director for DRA, the Division of Ratepayer Advocates. And let me explain a little bit about our role. Like Paul, we are also your representative for ratepayers. We have a little bit of more of a unique and what we would consider more of a direct role in that we are an independent division within the PUC. Our responsibility is to advocate for low-cost service consistent with safe and reliable service to ratepayers. We are independent in that we can advocate for or against what the utilities are requesting, and we can also advocate for or against what the actual Public Utilities Commission itself is requesting of either the utilities or of policy. So we play that unique role in that we are truly independent. We were asked to answer a couple questions as well. The first being, what is the ratepayer perspective, an overview of the ratepayer perspective on this issue. The second question is, how can we ensure that the utilities receive adequate funding to do their safety work? And the last question is recommendations for changes in protocols to ensure that this type of event doesn't happen again. I do want to mention, as Paul did, that one of our staff, actually one of DRA's staff who had been working specifically on this in this area, was the one who actually perished in this accident. So we are personally affected by this event. DRA is responsible for evaluating, as I mentioned, the request for funding that the utilities ask for. We don't recommend or decide how much they should be spending on something. We evaluate what they're asking for, and then we ask them to verify and determine that that's an appropriate expenditure. Our job is to review their requests, to evaluate that if it's an appropriate request, if it's cost effective, if it can be done in a different way, or if it is exactly prudent. We do not have the authority to decide whether they should spend money on pipeline safety or on propositions or any other activity. Our job is to say, here's what they're asking for, and here's how much they should be getting to do that. Our job is to then make recommendations to the PUC so that they consider the full independent consideration of the ratepayer. We also ensure that funds are used appropriately. One of our roles is to review what we call the general rate cases. The utility asks for funding for all the activities that they're going to be doing over the next 3 years. We evaluate how much they have spent in the previous year, and then determine if their request is appropriate based on what they have spent in the past and what they are expecting to spend it on in the future. We also want to make sure that ratepayers aren't paying for things that aren't necessary. One of the big concerns is that events like this, it basically allows the utility to ask for additional funding to do many things using ratepayer funds that may or may not be necessary, and may or may not have any actual resulting in any appreciable increase in safety. So that's one of our roles, is to make sure that they're asking for the right thing. And finally, we are looking at the investigations that are being done, both at the federal level and the independent investigation that will be done at the PUC, to determine if there are recommendations on protocols on things that not only the PUC might be able to do differently, the utility might be able to do differently, but as what DRA might be able to do differently as well. And that includes determining if we should be more critical in evaluating exactly how funds are spent in the future. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and open myself up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shukian. I appreciate your comments. What we're going to do is just open it up to some questions that we have here, and if I may have a few, quite a few actually, but I'll start with just a couple, and then turn it over to the other members of the legislature for their comments, and then I can pick up a few. Mr. Clannon, has the federal government warned the CPUC about problems with its natural gas pipeline safety inspections ever?
Warned is not the right word. We have a very close relationship with the Federal Department of Transportation and the part of DOT, the part of transportation that handles pipeline safety. It's called the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They're the ones who set the rules and then oversee the state's enforcing of the rules. So we've got a very close relationship. We are in constant contact. There is a formula that PHMSA, I'm just going to use the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA. There's a formula that PHMSA uses to determine how many inspectors they think that a state should have, and it's a complicated formula, depends on miles of pipeline and so on. According to that formula, and they've notified us a couple of times, according to that formula, we should have had about 2 more inspectors. I said that we had 9. Their formula says that we should have 11 point something. I also just mentioned, by the way, of course, that we're hiring 4 more. Can I just say that, the truth of that question is, have we been notified that we needed more inspectors? Yes. We're talking about 2 inspectors. At the same time, as PHMSA has been recommending that we have more inspectors, PHMSA has been rating our overall effort in the 90%. Every year. California is unique in the number of mobile home parks and propane systems that we regulate. These same 9 people regulate. And our view was that because of that uniqueness, we needed to be in this dialogue with PHMSA, but our overall pipeline safety system was being rated so high that our pipeline safety system was meeting the federal standards. And as I said, we're with the support of some key legislators, we're now expanding that from 9 people to 13.
Well, isn't it true that the federal officials sanctioned the state because of the gas pipeline safety inspections and the number that as shortchanging public safety, and they withheld funds to the CPUC because of that?
Yeah, this is the same question. There's a federal matching fund formula. I think we wound up getting $30,000 less in that year. I think it was 2004 as a result of this formula. But it's the same issue.
Aren't we the only state that does not meet the minimum standards?
That I don't know.
Okay. The San Francisco Chronicle reported that even though PG&E had more pipeline infractions than the rest of the state's major pipelines combined over a 6-year period, the PUC did not levy a single fine on the utility during that period. Can you explain why and if the fines were levied, how the utility would have funded those fines?
Yeah, well, this is a dialogue the members of the public can help me with. The reason that significant fines are not levied, or any fines in our pipeline program over the last several years, is so as not to discourage the utilities from coming forward when they see a problem. I got 9 inspectors. I'm going to soon have 13 inspectors. The pipeline safety oversight depends on there being no disincentive for the utility to report problems. What you want is a utility, remember, the utility doesn't want their pipelines to be unsafe. What the oversight has to guarantee is there is every incentive for the utility company, in this case PG&E, to come forward when they find a problem. And Mr. Johnson gave a couple of examples of where that's happened. If you look across all the 50 states, what you find is that some things like the Public Utilities Commission, some state regulators over pipeline safety do more fining. Nobody does a lot. I think the state that does the most fining in this area was the state of Pennsylvania, and we looked at a period of something like 8 or 9 years, and all told, during those 8 or 9 years, there were a total of $3 million or so in fines. That's a significant dollar amount, but ask yourself whether that dollar amount is going to be driving utility billion-dollar decisions, which is what we're talking about.
Mr. Grant, just a couple of questions for you. Is the state has had I think a higher than average accident rate. Would you say that, I think, compared to others? And would you see a connection, or do you see a connection between our extremely low inspection rate and that higher than average accident rate?
Well, I don't know that we have a higher accident rate. Look, I'm in the city of San Bruno, where 8 people were killed 3 months ago. And it's not going to be a popular statement for me to say it's hard to compare safety records across states, across utility systems. Even if I take that as a given, I come back to my earlier explanation, and I want to hear whether you think there's some reason to it. Given that we are never going to have hundreds of inspectors, or we are unlikely to. And this question is answered across all the states. How best to set up a pipeline safety program? Isn't it to give the utility every incentive to report problems that they find, to do an audit function, to go after them when there's an accident, particularly when there's negligence shown, but as a day-to-day thing, to encourage the utility program to report problems that it finds?
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned in your testimony a little while ago that there was an audit written. There was at the site of the incident, there was an audit written up at that time of the explosion. Has anyone seen that audit results? If it's been written up, that means it means it's been concluded. Is that something that has been made public?
It has not. I'm looking at Rich Clark, who's the director of the PUC's Consumer Protection and Safety Division. I think that audit report is still actually being written now, isn't it?
The 2010 audit?
Yep. Yeah, so we need to get that public as soon as we can. The 2008 audit, I believe, has been made public, and didn't find any significant infractions. I think the members of the public need to know. So what's in these audits? What you find in these audits is PUC people making sure that the utilities have the right programs in place. We don't just believe what's on the paper, by the way. We send our people out during these audits out to do spot inspections. The people who are doing these audits are trained engineers, they're trained inspectors, trained by the federal government in Oklahoma City to exactly the same standards as the utility inspectors themselves are. So I think that's the answer. The 2010 yet, not public yet, but the 2008 one is public.
All right, thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Johnson, just a few questions at this point in time, and then we'll move to the other panelists. All utilities are required by federal law to have an emergency response plan, if I understand it correctly. And does PG&E have an emergency response plan?
Yes.
For a similar situation that occurred on September 9th?
PG&E has an emergency response plan for its gas system and its electric system, and it is required by federal code and also adopted obviously in the state, and that is part of the audit function that happens when the CPUC comes out. They review our emergency plans, both at each individual location. Each one of those has a separate emergency plan given the type of facilities they have and the type of contacts and people they'll be working with.
You made the comment at a response to a question at the Senate hearing in Sacramento that kind of surprised me a little bit, and certainly I want to applaud the heroic efforts of your employees who responded voluntarily when they saw the incident that occurred. But the question to me was, and I don't know if I got a correct answer or enough of an answer, was they were volunteers that went to try to solve the problem and turn the valves off and do whatever they could as good PG&E employees. But was there a plan and an effort in place to do, if you did not have the volunteers here, who would have been able to be dispatched? Were there people there to be dispatched and in close proximity, and a plan in place, a protocol established so that someone just knows, you know, this is the plan, this is what we do, we don't have to think about it, we know this, we have a rupture here, and this is how we do it. Is there something in place today or then to deal with that?
In respect to the emergency that you're referring to, and again, this is under investigation, and the excuse me, the NTSB will develop the timeline and share it at the appropriate time. But PG&E did dispatch an employee to that location immediately upon getting a call. That employee returned back and said, "We need assistance, we need crews," and that process of calling out crews started at that point in time. The individuals that operated the valves lived in South San Francisco and were already moving by the time that activity took place. So they saw the issue, they heard about the issue, and they responded. It picked up their safety equipment, all the equipment they needed to operate those valves, and then they went to those valves as quickly as they could get there, given the situation at hand, and operated those valves.
Did you know, did PG&E know at their Milpitas facility or someplace, as soon as that pressure dropped to whatever it dropped from 375 or 386 at the time to 200 and something, I mean, obviously someone knew something happened. I would surmise that I mean, someone didn't just open their furnace and that gas went. So did something occur immediately when that pressure dropped? Was there a signal? Was there notification and action taken at that point?
There was a signal that came in. We monitor the pressure 24/7 up and down the entire system, and we did get a low pressure alarm. By the time that low pressure alarm hit our systems, those folks were already en route. Okay. So they responded. Our PG&E employees responded immediately, and again, the individual that was our first responder, the first one that came in, lives in South San Francisco, knows this area very well, and actually used that area to train his children in terms of driving. So they're very familiar with it, they knew what they had, and they responded immediately.
Okay, we're gonna have two further questions at this point, Mr. Johnson. One, in relation to the three tests, inspection techniques that are used by PG&E on these lines. And there's the flyover, there's the walking, there's the test that is used for the sticks, or I guess it's the electrical, when we were standing over line 101 not too long ago, there was a nice description as to how that line is tested for the electrical current that could be so that if there's a break in the outer coating of that line and for any corrosion that may be inside. But it seems that the pigging, as was referred earlier, of running an inspection internally into that line is a better, more timely and state-of-the-art inspection than all of the others. Is that true?
There are 3 federally approved tools, and I think the intent of the tools are to look at the situation you've got in front of you and determine which tool is appropriate for the situation you're looking for. So I referenced the 3 inspection, so I believe you're referring to inline inspection, which we refer to as pigging, and I believe that's what you're referencing, Assemblyman. The other one is direct assessment, which is a visual assessment. You don't send a piece of equipment through it, you actually dig it up and look at it so you can visually inspect it and make sure it's in the condition you expect. And that's, I think, what you're referencing with what people often refer to as the ski poles. And then the last one is hydrostatically testing it or pressure testing it, where you actually fill it with a liquid, usually water, or sometimes you use an inert gas, and you pressure test it well over and above its design capacity. So if a pipeline's designed for 400 pounds, you would test it with water to 600 pounds to ensure the integrity. Each one of those are very good at individual pieces. And so you need to look at the circumstance to determine what the appropriate testing tool is. Having said that, not all 3 of them can be done to any one pipeline, and I think that's an important criteria and something we need to recognize, and that is people oftentimes talk about pigging as being a state-of-the-art. Pigging has been around for many, many years. It's been around for over 20 years. certain pipelines cannot be pigged. They need to be built in a certain manner. The diameter of that pipeline cannot change over to any significant amount over its length. It can't have certain types of bends, and it can't have anything going into the pipeline. And so it's a very restrictive situation where a pipeline or pigging can be utilized. The same holds true for hydrostatically testing at times. Obviously, if you have one pipeline serving an entire territory or entire area, taking it out of service for 3 to 7 days to test it is a real burden for the folks who count on that gas each and every day. So you need to look at the circumstances, you need to look at what it is you're trying to see and find, and then you need to pick the appropriate tool for the job at hand.
Well, the pigging issue that you referenced, I guess from my understanding that of the 1,100 miles of pipeline in populated areas, you've been able to do about 70 miles of actual pigging. And the entire peninsula has not been inspected internally with that type of remote or however it works within the system. And my understanding, again, is that it's because of the bends, the turns, the curves of the pipe, because of its age, and the dissimilar sizing of the pipe that has prevented that from occurring. If it were possible to use that, would that have been used in the peninsula?
I don't know that it would have been used. Again, you look at the situation, you look at what you're trying to establish, excuse me, what you're trying to find, and you try to pick the right tool for the right job. We have pipelines that can accept a pig and run, and we choose to use ECDA or hydrotest because we're looking for different things. In this particular case, you're correct. In line 132 was not a, quote, piggable line, and so we used on the pipeline as a whole that runs from Milpitas all the way to San Francisco. We did a direct assessment, both external corrosion direct assessment, and we did some internal corrosion direct assessment. We thought those were the appropriate risks for those pipelines, and that's the tool we chose for that in that particular case. In terms of what we've done so far, I think I referenced we've done about 737 miles of assessment so far, and 156 of those miles have been done with inline inspection.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, and I'd just like to, if you could come up here, Mr. Johnson, just to check. This is a map that, and I just wanted some clarification, because I seem to be myself a little unclear in terms of where the lines actually go in San Bruno and South San Francisco. And my reason for that, and I apologize for this, but this is the map that was provided to San Bruno, the city of San Bruno. And this is the map that you provided to a number of us on the day that we were in your headquarters office talking about the gas pressure issues as it moves forward. The question I had when I was at a meeting in San Bruno City Hall last week, they discussed the issue of line 109 coming down close to San Bruno Avenue, I guess is where that was, coming here and going that direction. On this map, and I just want some clarity of this, is it shows 109 coming up, going through the area of the concern, and not crossing over, not even crossing over at all.
Well,
is this the same, are we looking at the same thing?
This is a schematic at a scale that you couldn't see something this small. They would be sitting on top of each other. This is an accurate GIS map. And that circle, I mean, people can't see this, but it's a very small schematic. There's a very small circle that talks about where this segment of pipe is out of service. That circle represents all the way from this location all the way down to right in here. So
where does 109 cross that? Where does 109?
Well, this is accurate.
Right.
This is the accurate map.
So this one is not then?
No, this one is just a schematic. It's just that your scale.
I understand.
It's so
where do we see 109 going across?
It's
right
there. See where the lines get a little bit wider?
Okay, good.
That's that loop right there.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's what I need to see.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Amiano?
Thank you.
Question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pigging, huh? We heard a lot about pigging. I notice there's a young person in the front here. You've been very dutifully listening. I commend you. What grade are you in? You think you're smarter than a 5th grader then, I know that, huh? Well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, but with all due respect, I think we're being treated as not being smarter than a fifth grader. Mr. Glenn, I have to hand it to you. You're a very intelligent man and very, very, very glib. I've heard you worm out of the question around the $5 million Three Monty twice now, and I'm somewhat distressed at the spin that you're trying to put on it, and I would advise you to really re-examine what responses are going to be to questions like that and be as forthright as possible. I know we're making you squirm a little bit, but you know, that's why you get paid the big bucks, and you know, maybe you should look at that sometime too in terms of leadership, because you know what I'm hearing here is a sidestepping of accountability, true accountability, and it's fine for you to feel upset and grief at the people who are and I don't doubt that that's sincere, but your response to the question about, you know, well, we can penalize people, but we don't because we want them to step forward. You have to have kids. You have to know that there's more to disciplining and oversight than thinking, well, we're not gonna find them because then they'll step forward. You know, that's Disney World to me. That's not the real corporate world, the real corporate culture. And I'm not trying to demonize that, but it doesn't seem to me that you're recognizing that. I was in Vietnam, and I heard oftentimes when horrible things happen, why did you do it? Well, we wanted to destroy the village to save it. And I'm afraid it's a little too literal for me to accept your responses. But here's a question for you, then I have one for the PG&E gentleman, Mr. Johnson. You know, all right, I hope I'm smarter than a fifth grader. We had an incident in Rancho Cordova a few years ago. What did we learn from that? Isn't that a canary in the coal mine, so to speak? I heard you respond reactively. We're going to have 4 more inspectors. We can't have hundreds of inspectors. Well, and then what about technology? So didn't any red flags go up with Rancho Cordova? Wasn't anything learned? And was there something there that could have prevented what happened here in San Bruno? I know there's extraneous circumstances, and I understand that natural resources can only go so far in technology. But wasn't there any plan to not have what happened in Rancho Cordova repeated, and then why wasn't it applied to a situation that arose here in San Bruno? And if you could be brief, please.
The commission, just for the benefit of the crowd, there was an accident in 2008, Christmas Eve of 2008, an explosion in the front yard of a house in Rancho Cordova that killed a man who was standing out in his front yard talking to a utility, to a PG&E employee. That was an explosion on the distribution system, an entirely different set of issues in distribution than what happened here in San Bruno. The commission opened up what I think of as the prosecution phase of Rancho Cordova in our investigation there just a week or so ago. So it's quite likely that the commission staff will be recommending fines and penalties of PG&E in Rancho Cordova. What happened there? What happened there was PG&E installed the wrong kind of pipe. It was a pipe that wasn't safe in that person's front yard. It was there for a long time. It was there for a year and a half before the accident
Let me,
happened.
in the interest of time, be a little rude and interrupt you. In terms of Rancho Cordova, I mean, it was a very destructive thing. So I know you're not trying to minimize it, but why did it take 2 years for the investigation? And is this a normal time frame? 2 years is a long time for all the big bucks that, you know, people could expedite. I hope would expedite. So why 2 years?
The National Transportation Safety Board issued its final report in May of this year, and the PUC opened up what you think of as the prosecution phase just a few weeks ago. It takes time to do these investigations. I don't.
The loss of life. I mean, shouldn't that prioritize? I mean, I mean, I've been around a long time, and you know, there's a lot of bureaucratic cancer in all our institutions. But it seems to me, if you looked at the earthquake in Northridge, when then Governor Wilson put his mind to it, man, that thing got built fast. Cut right, and there's no bigger bureaucracy than Caltrans, you know. So, one more. That's it. was there a staff report, and is it part of the LOII? And if not, what's happened with that?
Yes, and it is. There are some, well, the answer is yes, and it is.
All right, thanks. And then for Mr. Johnson, and I'll turn it over to Mike. You touched upon this. There have been a lot of consumer complaints in and around the gas leak detection program, which to all reports failed in the early part of this decade because of poor management, which you of the gas leak surveys, falsified records, which is criminal, and improper employee training. So I know that heads rolled because of that, and you fired a few people. But is there? And we don't need the full explanation tonight. But is there more of an infrastructure to that so that it doesn't happen again? Not just firing of people, but so that there's something institutionalized, self-policing checks, et cetera, and so forth. Because, my fear is even though there's some very fine people who are PG&E employees, very, very fine people, I'm worried that, because you have this, corporations are defined as people now, that. So, but because of the influence of the hierarchy, to put it bluntly, people are probably going to be afraid to come forward. Do you have a whistleblower program? Just a few specifics aside from I fired somebody.
Well, let me focus on the leak survey where we found somebody who falsified records. So what we did is we started by bringing in everybody who does leak survey for PG&E and recertified them and made them go through a 2-day to 3-day training class to ensure that they are qualified to use the piece of equipment that they are given and that they know how to properly leak survey. We re-leak surveyed with what we called an accelerated leak survey, our entire system, in a little over 2 years. So we went back and did the entire distribution system again. And we have installed a quality control mechanism by which a third-party leak surveyor randomly goes in back of our leak surveyors, ensures that no leak is left behind. So we have all 3 of those in place.
Mr. Bradford?
Can I just add a clarifying question? Actually, Assemblymember Hill, you asked about how penalties are paid. And I just wanted to add that, generally penalties are paid for by shareholders, not by ratepayers. And in our experience working with the utilities and their requests for funding, they are very careful about how they spend shareholder money, much more careful than how they spend ratepayer money.
Can I just respond to that question or follow up?
That was.
Is that your?
Well, that was.
Mr. Bradford, you're on.
No, go ahead. But that was my question for Mr. Shukian, the difference between prioritizing ratepayer money versus shareholder money, and I think you just stated it.
Interestingly, he clarified that, but there's a question from someone in the audience was talking about that issue. And while you're on the subject, it may be a good time to address it, and that is, what's the difference when you talk about shareholder money or ratepayer money? PG&E is guaranteed a rate of return. So regardless of where the money comes from, they're getting a rate of return. Is that correct?
They get a rate of return on their capital investments.
Right.
And so they only get a rate of return on what the commission approves them in spending capital on. And so you could, I guess, characterize it as, they have a bank account that accrues from their capital investments, but that bank account is not guaranteed to be replenished if it depletes because it's only deposited by capital investment returns. If that.
I see what you're saying. That answers it. Thank you very much. Mr. Bradford? Oh, Ma, did you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, I do want to follow up on shareholders versus ratepayers. Shareholders do earn dividends off of a percentage of what the utilities make on the ratepayers. And so I think it's disingenuous when you say that the shareholders are treated better or looked at more carefully than the ratepayers because the shareholders make money from the ratepayers. So ultimately that money comes from us. So I don't like when statements are made like that.
Well, I just want to clarify. What I meant to say was that the utility is very careful in how they spend shareholder money. Not that we as ratepayer advocates have a difference in how we spend, or how we look at ratepayer versus shareholder money. But oftentimes we are asked the utility to put some of the risk of some of their investments onto the shareholders, and they are very reluctant to add risk to shareholder funds, much more than they are in ratepayer funds.
Okay, well, and I have another question then. This is something that has been bothering me for a long time. The PUC, not necessarily Mr. Clannon, but the commissioners have unprecedented power at the state level. They are basically unaccountable to the legislature or the people. They get appointed by the governor. Okay? Something has to change. It's very frustrating for us up here to try to ask questions. We can't sit through the hearings that happen all the time to track, for example, what happened to the $5 million. It's not easily visible, transparent, and something has to, I think the commissioners also, there's no commissioners speaking today, but there has to be some more accountability, transparency, and some responsibility to answer these questions. I'm just frustrated. I've been frustrated the last 4 years when we ask questions like this, like where does the money go? Why can't we oversee? Why can't we put it out there to the public? Why can't we see the reports? And we're always told, well, it's under the CPUC jurisdiction, and basically we don't have much oversight or say from the legislature, which is very, very frustrating. So I'm going to just put it on the record out there so people know we have been trying to bring more accountability to the commissioners that are appointed by the governor, that basically can do and make decisions like this.
I certainly don't disagree with you one bit, and unfortunately, I often tell folks that, as the Division of Ratepayer Advocates, we are the independent party, but, you could characterize that as, I like to characterize that as we are the watchdog of the regulators, but unfortunately we don't have the authority to truly be such as like an internal investigator. We only make recommendations to the commission itself on what decisions should be made.
Mr. Bradford.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on shareholder again, and I don't want to belabor this, but as an individual who spent 12 years working for a utility, I truly understand the rate-making process. It's a very cumbersome, a lot of man hours, and as you stated, lawyers and judges are involved. But wouldn't you agree it's an antiquated process and a very flawed process at the end of the day? As we stated, when there's higher priority for shareholder protection than ratepayer, because again, you have no shareholder value if you don't have customers. These are the shareholder values right here. Every customer that turns on a spigot, turns on a switch for electricity, or opens up a gas furnace, those are your shareholder value right there. And to spend $46 million on a campaign, but now say ratepayers are going to have to pay for the repairs that happen on your pipeline that exploded, to me, that's insulting, and it should be insulting to every customer that you have. That's just one thing. As it relates to performance inspections, do you do dual inspections, or should you do dual inspections the same way you deal with it on the railways?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Chairman Bradford. So on the Public Utilities Commission began its life as the California Railroad Commission 100 years ago, and throughout that time we've always done inspections of railroads under federal law and under state law, and on the railroad side we actually do primary inspections. A PUC person, an employee of the PUC, actually walks or drives along every mile of rail, of heavy rail and rail transit in California. It's been staffed to do that. The culture has grown up to do that. So is it impossible to do something similar on the gas transmission side? No, of course it's not. It's a question of how many resources we as a state want to put into it. I do want to give you the caveat that it's easier to go out and inspect a rail line than it is to inspect a gas transmission line. It's hella complex to do a rail line, I'm here to tell you, but at least you can see them, they're above ground. The transmission lines being below ground make it much more difficult. So I think this is exactly the sort of question, coming back to Assemblymember Ma's point, the discussion, we need to be having this discussion now, because this is exactly I think the proper role of the legislature is, what should the role of the PUC be here? You know, what job should we be performing, and how should we be resourced to do it? And I think, by the way, that the oversight that the Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee and its sister committee on the Senate side are tough regulators of the PUC. You know, as somebody who often appears before those committees, it's not the first time I've been made to squirm, I can tell you that.
And Mr. Johnson, you mentioned high consequence areas. I wasn't clear, are there different standards for high consequence areas versus what you consider low consequence? And if so, why isn't that policy implemented system-wide if you have a pipeline?
The federal code defines high consequence area, and it's determined by how many residents or how many dwellings
density
or specific types of facilities are within a certain radius of the pipeline itself, and that radius is defined in the federal code. It says is if you meet that criteria and you are therefore deemed a high consequence pipeline, you must then use one of those 3 tools to check for the integrity of the pipeline system. So it is a specific part of the federal code that dictates how the calculation is operated, how the radius is described, what is a high consequence area, and what you must do about it. And that is the federal code as it's written today.
And when was the last time, and maybe I missed that in the fining aspects, when was the last time a utility or pipeline provider was fined, or when was a violation noted, and what was done then?
Yeah, violations are noted all the time, sometimes dozens of violations, usually minor ones, usually what you would characterize as paperwork violations. I honestly don't know the last time a fine. It's been some years. It's certainly been years since a significant fine was levied.
And my last question, should that public safety information on pipelines be made available, maybe on the internet or something? And I know the protection of your assets and things of that nature, where pipelines are located, but still, I think you could give, as you say, in the pipe number or something, maybe not to a specific location where a violation, should that information be made available via the internet so residents can go online and know if they live in an impacted area?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think more transparency, as we have seen since September, is something that the public can be trusted with. The public knows what to do with information. There were concerns expressed in September when the utilities began making public, for example, just the location of the pipelines. I had people tell me that was going to be a big problem. People are going to panic or something. People can be trusted with this information, and they deserve to have it.
Thank you. Ms. Mall?
Thank you. I've been talking to public safety first responders up and down the state and asking them whether, if there is a fire or an explosion, do they know where the transmission lines are underground for their safety as well as the residents? And the answer varies around the state. Some do and some don't. So I am wondering, you know, when you talked about, sharing detailed maps to first responders. What does that mean? And also, how much information do cities and counties actually have as well?
In terms of the first responders, we've reached out to all the first responders in PG&E service territory. So far, we've held about 88 meetings with first responders, government officials, local areas of jurisdiction to share with them the information that you're seeing similar to what's in front of you here. In terms of first responders, they receive a map that's at a larger scale than that. It shows the pipeline locations, it shows the valve locations, and it shows what we call regulator station locations. These are 3 things that we believe that first responders ought to be familiar with, so if they come across this information or come across this situation, they at least know what they have in front of them. So they have those maps. And in addition, we are working to those who desire it to give them also GIS overlays of those of the locations of the pipelines themselves, also for those first responders that have a GIS system and use it as part of their dispatch.
And are you doing this voluntarily, or is it required by some law?
We're doing this voluntarily. It is not required by law.
Okay. Secondly, do you have any updates on the explosion that happened last night in Oakland?
What we know is on the explosions, we were first responders out there. We did a complete leak survey of the entire perimeter. There was no gas found anywhere in and around that environment. There are lots of rumors as to what happened there. I'm not going to speculate, but at this point in time, there's no reason to believe natural gas is involved in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn.
Thank you. I have a question to the PUC. You mentioned that you've added 4 inspectors to a total of 13. What could the PUC have done better to prevent this, and what will the PUC change going into the future?
We don't know what caused the pipeline to rupture. We don't know what caused the pipeline to explode. And any answer I give now is going to be a partial answer until the NTSB resolves that. But I think that the greater scrutiny on the pipeline system and pipeline safety that the whole state has been under, including the PUC for the last 90 days, has taught us some things. One is there needs to be a lot more public transparency about this. I've learned a lot more about doing a better job of pipeline safety from the interactions I've had with first responders and local government officials in the last 90 days that I would not have had there not been this explosion. So there needs to be a lot more transparency. There needs to be a lot more give and take. We just had a discussion about the give and take with first responders that PG&E is voluntarily doing. It wouldn't at all surprise me if that's an area of legislative interest. We do need some more inspectors. We do need to do a better job at the PUC of trend analysis, of being able to look at the inspection data that we have and make some predictions about future risks than we've been able to do in the past. I don't want to speculate about what we're going to find from the National Transportation Safety Board. I certainly see a lot of that speculation in the press, but we also have to be careful about making decisions based on no information. We could get it wrong.
And what exactly does the PUC look at when it performs an audit?
There's a whole long list, and I'll give you some examples of what we look at. So the federal code that's adopted by the state requires the utility to cathodically protect its pipelines. So cathodic protection is running a current through these transmission pipelines to help prevent corrosion. We go and make sure that their cathodic protection is working. We also have requirements under the federal rules for how pipelines are operated, how the valves are operated, who can operate them. Records have to be kept about how they're operated and by whom. We go and make sure that those records are kept. This, by the way, is a common area for us to find violations, where somebody was out working on a utility pipeline that may have had the right qualifications, but the utility didn't have a record of it when we went out and looked. So those are some examples, but basically what we're doing is breaking down the federal regulations and going out and verifying that the utility is complying with the regulations. That's a desk audit. That's an audit that happens in an office. Then our inspectors, who are trained engineers, go out into the field and run down anything that looked odd to them or anything that they had a question about. And while they're out, they do spot checks. They will actually go and look at the actual physical pipelines to make sure that what they see in the field matches what the utility has back in the utility's office.
Okay. Has the PUC required any restitution from PG&E yet?
In the gas pipeline safety area, not yet, and specifically with San Bruno, not yet. So our investigation is underway. We're partners with the National Transportation Safety Board in that. I don't even want to speculate about where that's going to go. An example of an investigation that is much farther down the line is the one in the Rancho Cordova accident. In that area, I expect the staff to be recommending fines and other penalties, and the commissioners will decide.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Mom?
Paul, I just wanted to ask, who does the audits? Who performs it?
Yeah, so there's a staff of 9. They're trained engineers, they're PUC employees, they're housed in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. They're the 9 that I keep talking about, and we're adding 4 more. Who they are is they're state employees, they're registered engineers, many of them. They're all qualified to do this work. They're also sent off to federal training programs to be certified to do this work.
Thank you. I have a couple
Mr.
more
Fong.
questions. This is a question for DRA, Division of Ratepayer Advocates. What role did DRA play in ensuring PG&E had adequate funding for improvements? Because you described the difference between shareholders and ratepayers.
Yeah, again, we review what the utility asks for. We do not decide what work needs to be done. That is, again, the responsibility of the utility and the inspectors to decide what safety aspects need to be funded. So, we basically are reviewing that request and ensuring that fund is used properly. So in that sense, we are not an inhibitor of their safety requests. And in fact, we essentially always allow them full funding for their requests for safety related expenditures.
Okay. And a question for PG&E. When do you expect the NTSB to complete with its full investigation?
I can't speculate on that, but most of the NTSB investigations of this nature take about 18 months, so it would be many months out before we get a final ruling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Fong. What I'd like to do now is go to the questions that you've raised. And I think they're excellent questions, and I'll just read them as they've been given to me. And if we can keep the responses, because I'd like to spend maybe another 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most, because we have some expert testimony that I think will be crucial and very important today. So if we can move through these rapidly. The audit that was mentioned on that site that the CPUC is working on, when will that 2002 audit be made public? And has PG&E responded? And if they haven't, when, why, and how soon will that be done?
So it's a 2010 audit. Rich, do we have an estimate of when that'll be public?
30 days? Very good. Thank you. Question, do I understand this correctly? The CPUC regulates the utilities, including PG&E. CPUC determines that a section of line 132 needs repair and allocates $5 million to that specific repair. PG&E disagrees that the repair is a priority and spends the $5 million on another project. The CPUC says, oh, okay. Question, who is regulating whom? Don't you think this process needs to change?
No, that's not the way it works. PG&E and the other utilities come in about every 3 years and say, we need X amount of dollars for our whole pipeline inspection, maintenance, and replacement program. It's roughly on the order of $300 million or so a year for PG&E. They come in and ask for that money to be put in your rates. The Public Utilities Commissioners have to decide if that's the right amount. One of the things that the Public Utilities Commissioners look at is the current list of those projects and the cost estimates attached to those projects. Using that evidence and other evidence that comes before the PUC Commissioners, the PUC Commissioners have to make that difficult call. Is that the right dollar amount? Then the utilities, once they have the dollar amount, say it's $300 million, go off, and they are the ones who are responsible and accountable for doing that work. And you need to give them, and the Public Utilities Commission needs to give them the ability to do that based on their expertise. Do they need to be held accountable? Absolutely. And the amount of public transparency of this process has been inadequate, and we need to do a better job of that. I note that it's a feature, Mr. Hill, of your legislation that was introduced yesterday. Who regulates whom? The Public Utilities Commission is a tough regulator of the utilities in California. Over the last 10 years, we've levied about $500 million. It's a billion with a B in fines and restitution over the utilities that we regulate. It's a tough regulatory regime in California.
Very good, thank you. How can I find out how close I live to a gas pipeline?
You can call PG&E's 1-800 number, and they should be able to give that to you if you're calling from your address or you have your account number. And in addition, you can get online, and online are several of the maps available. You can also go to my account at pgne.com online and see where your home is located compared to a gas transmission line.
Very good, thank you. Another question, where are the maps that, one, detail the disaster zone, two, detail the composition, age, and location of the major San Bruno gas pipelines? I think you've answered that, or how they can get that information. Three, where are the notices that detail the inspections and replacement schedules for San Bruno pipelines? What was going on at Crystal Springs recently by PG&E workers, if anyone happens to know that, and are replacements mandated by workers or by duration? Are replacements mandated by duration? Why not considering the old materials? God, I can't read it, I'm sorry. Does anyone know what that one?
Yes. Why considering the older nature of the materials, aren't the replacements mandated after a certain period of time?
For a certain age.
Not a single word about any replacements.
I think our experts are going to address that in some of their testimony. I saw that, so that may be best placed there. I saw some of their notes.
And about the information that PG&E provides about the pipeline, does it provide the age and composition of the pipeline?
The age and the composition are not online, no.
No, they should be.
Next question.
It's important to the integrity of the line and the replacement schedules to understand what kind of materials are in the pipeline.
Thank you, John. How old are current pipelines that are smaller and going through Crestmore Park that was impacted? Will they be definitely replaced? And how did the 2009 audit, what did the 2009 audit reveal?
I'm not sure what that question references. I'm assuming we're talking about the distribution pipelines in that area. The only transmission pipeline is line 132 through that neighborhood, and that's the line that's currently out of service.
And the rest are distribution lines?
The rest
which are much
are
smaller.
distribution lines that operate at much lower pressures, well below 60 pounds.
Including the one that goes
Okay.
along Skyline Boulevard?
No, in terms of the San Bruno location, and the map is up there showing the pipelines themselves, and the Skyline Boulevard, as it crosses over into San Bruno, there are two pipelines that parallel Skyline Boulevard, line 109 and line 132. Those pipelines parallel each other, and Assemblyman Hill is drawing them up until they get to essentially San Bruno Avenue. At that point in time, line 109 goes through San Bruno Avenue, ultimately parallels the highway, and then connects at a location that we call Heatley Station, which is on Crestwood Avenue. Line 132, as you all know, went up Glenview and then went down through that neighborhood right there. The section of line 109 that you're looking at that loops around, people oftentimes call that the loop, that was installed in 1993. I will also address, I recall the question, what's happening on Skyline Boulevard? After the rupture, PG&E had to conduct numerous pieces of activity, construction activity, to make sure that we could actually flow the pipeline this winter when we had needs. So we had to build cross ties between those two segments of pipe. One of those cross ties was built on Skyline Boulevard, approximately half a mile south of San Bruno Avenue. That's the activity you saw out there. There was a lot of activity in that area. There was also activity on Crestwood by Healy Station. Same type of activity was going on. And in addition, in front of Lenardi's and some other locations, we actually had to go in and move the distribution taps off the line that was out of service and move them onto the line that was in service. And that's the activity in the San Bruno area around construction, preparing for the winter season.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The initial report was a plane crash. I made the 911 call after my wife told me a plane crashed in our backyard. How could PG&E employees have known it was a gas leak when it was being reported on KCBS as a plane crash for at least 20 minutes?
Well, I don't wish to speak for the first responders, but the first responder that came out from South San Francisco said he saw the fire. He had seen plane crashes. He'd been in the military, and this was a clean burning flame, which indicated it was natural gas. Therefore, he got in his truck and took action.
Complacency is a neutral word. Obviously, the system broke down. This should not have happened. You hopefully can assure it won't happen again, but it's horrible that it did. As a comment, no question. Over the past several years, there has been a lot of construction in the blast area. Was the pipeline inspected after each construction activity? If not, why not?
Well, the inspections are done periodically. So we talked earlier about patrolling, which is going over the pipeline and taking a look at the situation it's in. That's done quarterly in that particular area. Leak surveys are done annually in that area. There have also been other leak surveyors in that area. All that information is part of the NTSB investigation, along with all the construction activity that was taking place. And at the end, and I know this is what we all want to know, and we don't know yet, and that is we need to figure out what caused this tragedy so it doesn't happen again.
This is for PG&E and CPUC. How can you assure us that we are safe in our homes if we live next to one or more of PG&E's gas transmission lines this winter and beyond?
Well, I'll start with that. You can be assured that we are doing everything possible to ensure those pipelines are safe. So right now, the pipeline pressure has been reduced by 20%. That's a significant change in pipeline pressure and a significant increase in the safety factor itself. We continue to patrol line 132 weekly until we figure out what happened on line 132. We have done a complete leak survey of all the pipelines in the San Bruno area. And in fact, some of the distribution lines are out there, and we have ramped up all of our activity around call before you dig, which is our contractor activity. That's our biggest concern, is third-party damage also, along with asking folks if they see anything in and around the area to please contact us.
This is a question from Bob, who lives on Claremont Drive. It's his comment to PG&E and PUC. It's obvious that the line pressure was increased, causing the line to rupture. I don't know if that conclusion has been determined yet, but my question is, if the line was rated for 400 pounds per square inch and the pressure increased to about 386 pounds per square inch, and the NTSB said in their initial report that the pipe showed no sign of corrosion and had the same thickness throughout the pipe, how often are those pressure gauges inspected and corrected and calibrated, if problems?
The pressure references in the NTSB investigation is off our data acquisition and supervisory control system. So those are calibrated on a regular basis. We don't have any reason to believe that that data is incorrect. The pipeline that ruptured was designed for 400 pounds. It had a maximum allowable operating pressure of 400 pounds. And as the NTSB indicated in their document, that pipeline saw 386 pounds. Again, we don't know why that pipeline ruptured.
Next question. How can we more forcefully penalize PG&E so ratepayers are not ultimately paying the fines? Can we, number one, reduce allowed profit levels on equity investment from its current ratio of 9 to 1 to 9% to 2 or 3%? Two, put a moratorium on executive bonuses, stock options, et cetera, for PG&E executives. PG&E should not benefit from this disaster.
Well, I'll field that one. Those are all possibilities. Those are all things that the Public Utilities Commission could order. We have to make sure that the utility has access to enough capital so that it can have a safe system. If we need to have these pipelines replaced, it needs to be able to do that. And those are things that the PUC commissioners are always weighing.
Public power.
To whom at PG&E can a San Bruno resident communicate if they have questions about pipeline 109, 101, or 132? I'd like a name and mailing address, direct phone, and email address.
Who can they contact if they have questions?
If they have questions about the pipeline?
The pipeline,
Pipelines,
the pipeline
any
itself?
of the three, yes.
Well, they can certainly talk, and we would encourage them to work through the city, as we have many, many questions that come in from the city, and we like to make sure the city's involved and understands what kind of questions have been asked. And the city has a direct link to myself. My name is Kirk Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Gas Operations and Engineering. My LAN ID is mkj2@pge.com. You may send me a letter or a note.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. We were with the city on Friday, and there were a number of questions that I believe have been directed towards PG&E that it's been some time since they've received a response. So if you could look at that to make sure that the city is getting a timely response to their questions and answer, that would be appreciated.
I will follow up.
Thank you. In light of the public known facts regarding Rancho Cordova and the gas explosion, what has PG&E done to ensure PG&E's gas personnel are adequately trained and empowered to act appropriately to ensure public safety if there is a gas leak reported by residents?
As Mr. Clannon stated, the issue at Rancho Cordova was somebody used an inappropriate piece of 1 1/4 inch plastic pipe. It was pipe that was not supposed to be used for construction. It was a piece of pipe that came with the material to stabilize it as it came in a coil, known as sometimes referred to as coil pipe. We dug up and reviewed and leak surveyed every segment where we've changed out the pipe since that time period to ensure ourselves that we don't have that situation anywhere else.
Very good. This is to PG&E. If you do a flyover inspection of a gas line, how far away from the gas line are you looking at dead vegetation? The gas line in question was under the street.
In terms of the flyover that was referenced, there's actually 3 mechanisms for flyover. The 2 that we utilize and that I think Mr. Clannon was referencing is we use LIDAR detection for this particular activity. LIDAR can pick up methane from as high as 500 feet, which is roughly the height we flew at. And also in terms of dead vegetation, we look at the same time for dead vegetation as it can be an early warning of methane gas. That doesn't always mean it's natural gas. It could be other activity in that area. That's what we look at. And then we also, as part of that activity, that was our first effort, we also foot patrolled or ground patrolled the entire gas transmission system as a follow-up to that.
Why didn't PG&E ask first responders to evacuate more San Bruno residents until the fire was out, particularly residents living next to lines 132, 109 on Glenview, south of San Bruno Avenue? I would think that's be a question for the first responders rather than to PG&E. And we can certainly get that answer to someone for that question. independent of this, but I don't think you have a, do you have a response to that?
No, the, under incident command, which is how we all respond to emergencies, the incident commander for this event was the fire department, and we work under the fire department at that time. They are in control.
A question for PG&E. We have a home on Crestmore where gas was leaking. We had not been residing in the home yet. We had heard from neighbors that our gas line was repaired. We were never informed as to the cause, what was repaired, or what damage was caused. How are we to know what was repaired and is it done? Perhaps I can give you this card afterwards and you can
Please.
get the name of the person and their address and investigate. That would be helpful. The San Francisco Chronicle wrote a story a month ago pretty much comparing PG&E with Southern Cal Edison. The article, can't read Ken's question here, or handwriting, portraying Southern California Gas as very much ahead of PG&E in pig inspections. Is this true, and why is this?
I can't speak to the article.
Mr. Quanon, do you know?
Yeah, it's my general sense that the two systems are roughly comparable, but more of Southern California Gas Company's system is piggable. Does everyone know what pigs are? Those are machines that go through the pipes, actually internal to the pipe, to do the inspections. And it has to do with when the pipelines were built. It's really pipelines that were built in the last 40 years that were designed to be piggable.
John, I have to ask you, I'm sorry, but we've got to move on. All right, thank you. I have one more question, and I want to get through this, and there are a couple of others. We'll go to the next panel discussion, get the questions for there, and if there's time remaining afterwards, we'll go through some other questions. And I do want to make sure that your questions get asked this evening and answered, especially related to the panel that we have and the members here. This is about how many miles of high transmission pipelines in California? How many inspectors are there? I think we've answered that. With all of the construction, the California high-speed rail density development on railroad lines, what are plans to be certain that city contractors, developers work closely to monitor locations, pre- and post-construction for the integrity of the system? That would be, I guess, just to make sure that no one is going into your lines in terms of the construction for any other infrastructure improvements.
No, I appreciate that question being raised. That there is a requirement for all contractors in the state of California to call 1-800 call before you dig is what we say, or USA, Underground Service Alert. All contractors, all utilities, city workers, and everybody else that is going to do any excavation of any way, shape, or form is supposed to call, and all utilities will come out and mark those locations. That is a tool that we utilize to ensure that no one works around our pipeline, our gas transmission pipeline, without us there.
Very good, thank you. Further questions here? Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And we will now have our next panel, which is the expert analysis from Dr. Robert Weissenmiller, Commissioner and author of Contracting for Long-Term Natural Gas Supplies and Transportation. Rick Kuperitz, President, Accufax Incorporated, 37-year energy industry expert who recently testified before Congress on gas infrastructure and safety. And Glenn Stevick, Doctor, PhD, Principal Senior Mechanical Engineer, Berkeley Engineering and Research Incorporated, and a UC Berkeley alumni. Wanted to make sure we were able to say that this evening. And I just want to highlight one thing. This forum tonight is something that we want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered, and we get this information out to the public and to the Assembly members and legislators. But I wanted to just for a second I thanked our Mayor, Jim Ruane, for his outstanding leadership and the work that he's done, but I also want to thank our Congresswoman Jackie Speer for her leadership and help and assistance that she's given us in this time and for San Bruno, and the town hall meetings that she has led that have brought such insight into this issue. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all in the same family here, trying to do the best we can. So, Dr. Weissenmiller, if you'd be kind enough for about 10 minutes, perhaps, if that would work, and then we'll have questions, I'm sure, afterwards.
Sure. Is the mic on? Okay. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum tonight. I'm Bob Weissenmiller. I'm an energy commissioner One of the things I'll do tonight is describe how this incident, what we're trying to do to respond to it. The Energy Commission is in Sacramento. Our responsibilities are different from the PUC's, and as I walk through this, I'll spell out some of those responsibilities. I'm also a Cal graduate, but I was appointed by the governor to the Energy Commission at the beginning of this year. It's a return for me to public service. I served at the Energy Commission as a staffer between 77 and 82 under Governor-elect Brown. And I worked in the policy area at that time. In between my period of public service, I have been a consultant for a number of years, particularly in power and gas markets. I actually have testified a fair number of times at the PUC, but never on safety issues. So when this happened, I contacted President Peavy that weekend and said anything the Energy Commission could do to assist the PUC, that certainly I would work with the other commissioners to provide that assistance. I would note that actually my wife, before we met, lived in San Bruno for a number of years. So I also certainly felt the connection to this community. In terms of how this affects the Energy Commission, I'm going to talk about 3 ways that, in my thinking, this affects what we do and how I've been trying to influence that. First thing is the Energy Commission is responsible for permitting and siting thermal power plants in the state of California that are over 50 megawatts in size. And we have a very strong focus on that. I'm actually in charge of the siting committee at the Energy Commission. I've served on 11 cases involving power plant siting. Most of those are solar. But it occurred to me that any community where in the future we're looking at siting power plants, the question will become, is the pipe, what do those power plants mean for the community in terms of public safety? Now, we regulate basically the power plant, or permit the power plant, and the gas infrastructure up to the first point of interconnection into the utility system. And so, and part of our analysis, we have public hearings in the community. We're responsible for the CEQA analysis. We're responsible for looking at, does the applicant comply with all the applicable laws, ordinances, and safety requirements. So we have a very comprehensive, very thorough review, roughly a year-long process, certainly in the community. And at this time, for gas plants, we are considering 6 applications. 2 of those are in Northern California. One of those is at Mariposa in Alameda County. One of them is at Oakley in Contra Costa County. We have another proposal in Northern California in Solano County, which is not that active at this point, frankly. And we have 3 more in Southern California where we are also permitting. One at the BP Watson Refinery in Los Angeles, one in Palmdale, which is a combination solar gas plant, and one in San Diego at Carlsbad. And so what we're looking at, and when this occurred, I gave directions to siting staff that we needed to anticipate public concern about pipeline safety in those gas power plants cases. And also I contacted the utilities, including PG&E, asking them, typically PG&E is not active in our siting cases, but asking PG&E to have a representative at our public hearings so that to the extent the public had comments or concerns, they could use our public hearings as an opportunity to reach out to the public and discuss those issues. And I'm on the Mariposa case. We've had one hearing at Mariposa. PG&E had a representative there. It was not something that came up, but again, I think it's our responsibility to not only look at these issues in our siting cases, but to make sure that we reach out to the public and to provide a forum for the utility to reach out to the public to help allay consumer concerns about it. So that's one area. The other area where I thought where we could try to help is that, as you know, in California, there's something called the Public Interest Energy Research Program, where we take money from the ratepayers and we use that for R&D in energy technologies. Now, part of that, we do that generally on electricity, and the PUC has a similar program on gas. It corresponds to about $24 million a year that, for administrative simplicity, we actually administer that for the PUC. Instead of them having to put in place their own program, it was easier for us to extend our electric program by picking up their gas responsibilities. And so one of the things that occurred to me was how much of that research was useful in this particular area. And so I've talked to the staff. That's actually under a different commissioners, Byron and Boyd, or R&D committee. But they agreed that anything we could do at this time to help, we wanted to do. And we've contacted the PUC, particularly Paul Clannon, on the question of, do we need to start looking at ways of redirecting some of that money to do R&D that would be relevant in these circumstances? And so, again, we've looked at the current R&D program, looks at energy efficiency. There's a wide range of things that are very good programs, but I think it's certainly something in people's consciousness now that we need to consider more, starting to allocate some of that money into these areas in terms of pipeline safety, performance, and reliability. And so we've talked about starting to look at what's not already encumbered for this fiscal year, starting to redirect that, and presumably for next year, again, we'll work with the PUC on incorporating a broader program there. But again, the types of things that we could look at, I mean, we've had, obviously, this is a high-tech state, so trying to figure out in terms of sensors, in terms of high-tech, is there things we could do that would give us better insight into the condition of the pipelines? So that's the second, and the last thing, again, just to be brief, is that one of the things the Energy Commission does is we prepare a report for California every 2 years looking at energy policy issues, and part of that is looking at natural gas. And actually next year I will be responsible for that report as the presiding chairman on that, and I'm responsible for the committee at the commission that directs our electricity and natural gas analysis. And so looking at the natural gas, we've looked at generally from a system perspective, what are the loads, what are the supplies, what's the price, what are the flows, but I think we really have to look at the implications of San Bruno in terms of the reliability and what that means, and start looking at making sure in the planning process, again, that we're worried about these issues. So again, we're starting that process now, and we're going to do the best we can.
Thank you, Dr. Weiser-Miller, and it's encouraging to know that the Energy Commission will be working closely to try and develop and help some of the develop some of the solutions to some of the problems that we're trying to identify as we move forward. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Gupperitz, thank you very much for being here this evening.
Thank you for bringing me down. I've been asked to hold my comments as an engineer to 10 minutes, which is nearly impossible for an engineer, but I'm going to make a real good stab at that. Let me just comment to kind of reinforce what he's saying here that a lot of folks may or may not understand. I've built a few gas-fired power plants and engineered them, operated them. You can't have a gas-fired power plant without a transmission pipeline, and a subject. And if you don't feel comfortable about transmission pipelines, you're probably not going to get a gas-fired power plant. So they are interrelated. So this is a good subject to be dealing with. With that in mind, going to my 10 minutes, I've been asked to focus on two major issues. An overview on the integrity of natural gas pipelines and related to the federal regulations, various other regulations, and then a comment on some suggested preliminary finding issues related to improvements in state regulation and oversight as a possible suggestion. And I want to just comment that this is a good start, folks. Don't feel frustrated about this. You're not going to get like the answer tomorrow. In today's soundbite society, everybody wants, well, we go right to the answer. Well, that only works in a couple of things, and it doesn't work in this stuff. As you learn more information, cities don't want to know a lot about pipelines. Why would you want to be in a pipeline business in the sense of understanding that stuff? But you're in it now. And a terrible tragedy here is what can happen if you don't understand certain things. With that, let me just step right into the state of integrity management regulatory requirements at the federal level. And I don't call them codes. I call them requirements. They're regulatory. They carry certain obligations. Either you comply with them or you don't. The IM program been enacted over the last 10 years, and it's been phased in. It started with liquid lines, phased into large liquid lines, and then the smaller liquid lines, and then in the gas transmission. The gas transmission was its final rulemaking around December of 2003, if I recall, somewhere in that time frame. My point is the regulations took a while to promulgate into regulations, and then they're phased in. And you heard some comments about the baseline assessments. There's a 10-year period there. You do 50% the first 5 years, then the last 50% for the certain higher priority lines. And that's a lot more detail than you want to know. But important issues that relate to integrity management is one, the integrity management program must be written and integrated. It isn't just one piece. It's a whole series of steps. And so you go to the gas regulations, Code of Federal Regulation 192 subpart 0, and it's a real long section, but you'll find it's kind of a plan. It's a process. And the reason that was developed is we were seeing massive, not only liquid, but also gas transmission pipeline ruptures that indicated more than one thing was broken here. It was process. We'd go back and look at these things, and we'd find that it wasn't just one area. Oh, it wasn't just an accident. It was an incident in which a whole series of breakdowns occurred, and they become link. And it's that link situation that causes the failure. The first rule in gas pipeline operation, don't rupture. All right? And I think you folks have learned firsthand what a gas pipeline rupture impact zone can be. And I'll comment into that in a second. Getting back to the integrity management rulemaking, the federal regulations are very clear here. The pipeline operator is responsible for the knowledge of his system. He needs to know what he has. He needs to know the different risks on each pipeline system. He needs to implement prudent risk management for those particular risks, which may be different in each system. And then he needs to choose the appropriate assessment methods of a list of methods that are permitted in regulation to match the risk. And the key operation issue here is matching the risk. The regulation goes on to further emphasize that the assessment methods, you should not rely as an operator on many pipeline segments on one particular integrity assessment. Flyovers are not integrity assessments. I want to be real clear about that. They're not listed as the 4 methods permitted in integrity assessment for your pipeline, for gas pipelines. Just a couple comments on the San Bruno natural gas transmission incident. The rupture raises serious questions about the regulatory and operator integrity management processes in California, a statement I don't make lightly. The NTSB needs to release preliminary findings on how the pipe specifically failed. They've had the pipe for 3 months now, and I have a lot of respect for the NTSB, but it's pipe. All right? It only fails in so many ways, folks. To the credit of the NTSB, and I want to make fun of them, to the credit, they will issue a report or documents or preliminary findings that will be subject to public scrutiny. They're not going to hold back stuff in terms of their final report, but they have normally released, when it's important, preliminary findings. I think in this particular incident, it is very important to find out what was the initial cause of why this pipe failed, the actual metal. I'm not talking about what caused the metal to fail, but why the metal failed. It's been 3 months. It's long enough. One last observation as a person with a lot of experience in this area, helped writing some of the integrity management rulemaking and commenting on it at the federal level. Line 132 has been down for 3 months. Things working? You're getting gas? The line could have been shut down for hydro testing. Hydro testing is a viable assessment option permitted in the regulation. It is superior to direct assessment. In the involvement of the integrity management rulemaking, we zeroed in on smart pigging technology when it was appropriate, integrity management when it was appropriate, another engineering method if it could be proven to advance technology and be equivalent to those two, and then direct assessment. Direct assessment is specifically limited to determinations of risk associated with external corrosion, internal corrosion, and a specialized form of corrosion called stress corrosion cracking. That's it. Common misperceptions, if I could just take a minute to talk about this, because everybody wants to solve the problem, but nobody wants anybody running in the wrong direction, spending millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and creating the illusion that you're safe when you're missing the real issue. I think most people will understand that. So to be fair, let's understand that when we got everybody in a room here and you want to kill everybody. Literally, I mean fighting, I don't mean the other thing. First of all, the thing I keep hearing with a lot of background and experience is pipeline steel ages. Well, pipeline steel does not age. It's carbon steel. I was talking to somebody about that earlier today, and I said, if steel actually aged, then you need to start taking down the Golden Gate Bridge. And she says, well, wait a minute, they maintain that. And I go, aha. Okay? There are some risks associated with certain ages of pipeline, but they're not related to, quote, the age. It's related to the vintage. When was the pipe manufactured? What decade? When was the welding techniques? In what decade? What were the inspection methods? In what decade? Now, I'm not going to give you all the answers to that issue, but what I'll point out is, recently in the last couple of years, we've had several $1 billion worth of new pipeline installed in the United States. And some of that new pipeline has a different risk that old pipeline never had. We've gone under high stress, high pressure hydro test, and the steel permanently deformed. Now that in itself, because it's carbon steel, to the credit of the Federal Office of Pipeline Safety, that in itself is not a problem. But most older pipe would never have done that. And when they chase down in more than one new project, multi-hundred of millions of dollars of pipe, multi-billion-dollar projects, somebody messed up in the management QA/QC. They bought low-grade steel. It's like buying a Cadillac and a Volkswagen shows up. Real quick, another comment I've heard about is that there's a lot of activity and discussion about ROVs and automatic control valves, remote operated. ROVs are remote operated valves, ACVs are actual automated control valves. ROVs, you need a command, close. You have to have somebody say, oh, close it. Automatic control valves don't take a command. They'll see some sensor, some signal, and they'll close on themselves. We need to have a very real public discussion and a vetting about this issue. There'll be areas where this is an appropriate solution to an issue. However, it will not prevent the initial gas rupture. It won't prevent the initial gas explosion and the initial gas fireball. All right? However, it will stop the duration of this thing going for an hour and a half, depending on how you pick it and where you do it. So I just leave that as you need a vetting on that issue. I got two other comments related to common misperceptions. Over-reliance on direct assessment should be a red flag. Alarm bells should be going off. I think I've been pretty clear about reasons for why. Smart pigging is not always the best approach. We've had too many recent pipeline ruptures where the operators had just completed smart pigging. And they picked a really dumb pig, or they had a smart pig and didn't understand the results, or they just completely ignored what everybody was trying to tell them, or they didn't calibrate the pig. So I don't want everybody running out there and saying, let's go spend $100 billion to make everything smart piggable. There's a reason we left hydro testing and other methods in besides.
They put lipstick on that pig, it sounds like.
The last thing you want to explain is to a board of directors is you just ran a couple $1 million pig, and 2 months later you had a gas pipeline rupture. All right? And running a smart pig, the couple million is the cheap part. You have to do validation and calibration. So think about that as you work your various discussions. I'm going to, because I'm running out of time here, I'm going to make some recommendations to improve California natural gas transmission pipeline safety. And understand, I'm focusing on transmission. There are other pipelines, but transmission are the ones that can put thousands of tons into your neighborhood. In the San Bruno case, the NTSB has reported, you have to run the calculation, but that was 1,100 tons of natural gas. That's tons. I would characterize that rupture as a low mass spectrum release. That is on the lower range. There have been a lot bigger ones in the United States.
Gary, huh?
All right, I don't want to scare people. You don't rupture. You really try to avoid this. And there are a lot of responsible pipeline operators. I'm not trying to paint a good picture or a bad picture here. I've had rooms where we've had fisticuffs and discussions about this, and there are a lot of people, and we're trying to reach some rational compromise here. And yet, you know, they don't want to rupture. The common theme I see in the really good guys arguing this is they don't want to rupture either. You need to immediately, in the regulations and in the state process, you need to immediately shift from direct assessment over reliance and integrity management. It never was the intent. DA has very limited application on most pipelines. It's in there for a certain reason. It never was meant to be a major inspection method because of its restrictions. And the feds will tell you this as well. Shift to smart pigging and hydro testing integrity management assessments that address more pipeline risk of concern. Encourage that. You might want to think about that in your rate making. Don't give them the only solution, but guide them into the process. Beware of the dumb smart pigs, the pig in the poke, per se. Incomplete hydro test procedures. I've seen too many. It isn't just throwing water into those and go running a hydro test. You got to know what you're doing. And there's a certain method and process. It's not defined in the regulations. Operators need to know their systems and the subject. You must increase the regulatory inspections. It appears you have too few inspectors, and you need to shift your priority away from master meter and propane systems. If I understand it, majority of your inspection work days go there. Well, they don't put 1,000 tons plus into your neighborhoods. All right? I mean, that's just common sense. You should disconnect pipeline safety inspection, enforcement, and compliance from the rate-making process. PHMSA, your office, or also known as the Office of Pipeline Safety, but it's called PHMSA now, does not get itself involved. It's a safety agency. It does not look at rate. Something you want to think about. I'm not going to give you the answer there. There's more than one way to get there. I think you can work it out. Okay. Place more, but not all, pipeline information into the public domain to instill confidence about effective regulatory change. You need to ensure your local governments have adequate knowledge of their responsibilities and their authority concerning pipelines. We'll have some questions later. I'm sorry, and I appreciate your patience for putting up with me.
No, thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. Your candor. Dr. Stevick, welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if my mic's on here or not.
It is.
Well, good. Well, you've already gotten a fairly good overview. I'm here mostly to answer questions. I did the last fracture control plan on the Alaska pipeline. I helped design dampers for the Golden Gate Bridge, both of which have had no problems. I'm going to make a few comments on what are the typical failure modes, what are the inspection methods for stopping those failure modes, and how you might match those things up. And this idea of aging steel doesn't age, but it does absorb damage. And over time, you can have fatigue or strain damage in the steel that does weaken it. So what are the mechanisms for that cause pipeline failures? The most common is third-party damage, someone hitting it with a backhoe, construction nearby. I noticed this pipe from the pictures is constructed by taking plate, rolling it into a tube, and longitudinally welding it. Anytime there's a weld, that's a weak spot. And it's a place where you can get fatigue damage. The pressure does not stay constant inside these pipes. It varies up and down. So you do get some fatigue. General corrosion, acidic soil, that type of thing. The NTSB results tend to indicate that wasn't the issue, but it is something that does happen on occasion. Soil movement. Over many years in California, obviously, we have places where soil moves. You've got a pipe that's 1950s vintage. It has welds, lots of welds. You can have strain damage build up from just movement. Okay, now let's talk about inspection techniques. You've already heard the three common methods. Pressure testing, which I think is by far the best. Why? Because you test the entire length of the pipe. You go to typically 50% over design or operating pressure, and you do it with a liquid. And what typically happens is, if there's a crack growing in that pipe, it bursts during the hydro test. Now you know exactly where you have to replace the pipe. And it tests the whole thing. Direct inspection, it's like measuring one spot in a long chain or a long rope. You just don't inspect the entire thing very well with direct inspection. Direct inspection typically follows pigging. What is pigging good for? Today, pigging is pretty much very good for picking up general corrosion. Will it pick up fatigue damage in a weld? No, it won't pick that up. Will it pick up damage due to a backhoe hitting the pipeline? Sometimes. So it's really good for general corrosion. So pigging is usually not, when you have good cathodic protection, good corrosion control, pigging doesn't usually do very much. Direct inspection usually follows pigging. In other words, if you run your $1 million pig down the line, it's got batteries, it's got ultrasonic sensors, every inch it's measuring the thickness. You get that pig to the other end, you download all the information, map it, look at it, you'll see the thin spots. Then you go inspect those spots because the pig has identified those spots. But again, one, the pig doesn't pick up most types of damage. And that's why direct inspection is not that great. The other method that's been talked about here is flyover. Flyover does work quite well for new modern steel that's extremely tough. Why? Modern steel is so tough, or can be so tough, that it'll actually leak before it breaks. It's a fracture mechanics criteria we use. In other words, we calculate how tough does this steel have to be so that a crack can pop through, leak, but not open the pipe up. It's called leak before break. You'll see it in any textbook on fracture mechanics. Great for new pipes, old stuff. Old pipes, if you get a crack that pops through, the pipe will rupture, almost certainly. Last thing I want to comment a bit. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, okay, very good. Risk management. We're talking about a lot of inspections, but you have to manage the risk. And that means matching the inspection technique with the type of failure modes that your pipeline might see, which tends to lead back to hydro testing in this particular case. We've talked about automatically closing valves. Again, I think the biggest importance is prevent the disaster. I'm less concerned about controlling it afterwards, even though it's something we definitely should consider and possibly put in here. But it's also in managing risk, the logic that goes into your existing valves. We know from the NTSB report that there was a signal loss to a particular valve, which failed open instead of failing shut. You have to go through this kind of logic and figure out what's the best way to operate your pipe with the valves you have right now. So with those comments, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much. That's what, good comments, good thought-provoking comments. And now if there are questions from members?
Just,
Damiano.
I just love good science. You know, it's so important. And thank you for the edifying information, particularly for all of us who are not as well versed around engineering concepts, et cetera. The flyover thing, of course, everybody's ears perked up because it was stated in such a way that it was presented as infallible, or and I think what we're hearing is there's a combination, there's equations here that need to be met. Obviously, you need the way things are now. You need pipelines to transport the gas. Are there any attempts on either at UC or the Energy Commission to look at alternative transport of gases, and liquefied gas? I think sometimes is transported by tankers. Just looking for.
Certainly, the Energy Commission has looked at LNG. That was a big issue a couple years ago. But most of that would be moving gas from, say, one country to here. So once you get in California itself, moving it around, certainly the pipelines are, very effective ways of doing that. And the question is, how do we do it more safely, I think. You know, obviously the challenge is, I think, to convince people that the pipeline, A, we have to make the pipeline system safe, but also convince the public that's the case.
But by and large, the less handling, less valves, the safer it is. Pipelines are probably far more safe if managed correctly than LNG transport.
Oh, yeah, no,
So
they
it-
are.
so it
No
is
question.
manageable. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think people don't want to lose sight of that perspective, that pipelines are by far the safest way. But if it's in your neighborhood, it takes it a little closer to home. And so you have to ask valid questions here, and you're pursuing stuff. I said earlier, you don't really want to be in the pipeline understanding business, but you're there. You're there. You're there in a way that you just didn't want to be. And now you're going to, and you're not unique. This is not unique in the sense that other states have been there too.
I was thinking about land use issues too, and pipelines in high-density areas. Obviously, in this area, the pipe was laid before the development. However, there should be ways to deal with that as well, particularly with zoning and et cetera.
Ms. Ma?
Yes, I have two questions. Number one, I think Mr. Krupowicz and Mr. Stevick mentioned hydro testing. So why aren't the utilities, it seems like the utilities aren't hydro testing and they're relying on the other methods. Is there a difference in cost or some sort of equipment that prevents them from doing, because it seems like hydro testing is the most complete and comprehensive, but they're not doing that.
The cost is higher, and you do have to have some redundancy in your system. So in other words, you may have to lay some additional pipe so you can route gas while you hydro test certain segments.
Okay, so cost and inconvenience.
And there are some limitations to hydro testing. You have to know, I mentioned earlier, you really have to understand how to do a right hydro test, because if you do the wrong hydro test, and clearly in the example I gave earlier with some of these newer multi-billion-dollar pipeline projects, they did the wrong hydro test, and it was clearly evident by the way, they went to pipe failure on some cases, but the pipe had actually, it was deforming and it should never had. So they didn't ask the question, maybe I had bad pipe, and eventually they figured that out. But
Yeah, and so I'd like to maybe speak online if I can get your cards on how we can ensure that these companies are not just relying on flyovers, for example, but they are doing all the assessments or whatever is highly recommended, because I'm sure each utility does something different, but we don't know.
Well, I want to comment about that hydro test that you just mentioned. They discovered that it was the wrong pipe. To me, that's a successful hydro test. I mean, I've been at hydro tests where the piece of equipment blew up. Everyone's all upset, but I'm saying that's exactly what we wanted to happen.
What I didn't tell you is that some pipe did fail, then other projects they didn't fail. It was only after they had the projects that failed, they went back and says, what the hell's going on?
Right.
So your regulators were working at the federal level is what I'm giving them credit for. But you have to be real careful here. And so I'm not saying it isn't an important test. It's listed as one of the three, and it's the first two. Smart pigging, because we want to advance that technology, and the hydro testing. But there are some limitations, and I think you heard it earlier. Some places you may have a 42-inch line. It's the only line servicing a whole section of the country, and to take that one out of service with hydro tests, that's one of the reasons we allowed direct assessment to be entered into the rules for integrity management. But it was very clear, and you can talk to a lot of players. It was very clear that direct assessment was only going to be useful in certain areas. And that's the question you got to ask. If this failure wasn't a corrosion failure, it's not going to be good.
And the second question is, you talked about grades of steel. Like, how do we know that they're using good steel that's going to last versus, the cheapest steel just to save costs and, increase shareholder value?
Well, I can say from experience, having consulted a little bit on the pipelines that have gone in the last decade, they are using very high toughness steel. It is good steel. And they have to meet a certain criteria so that they will leak before they break. So flyovers will actually work for some of the new pipe. Now, there is an opportunity here too. We had a failure. There's a lot of pipe that can be tested, so we have a good idea of what kind of strain, what kind of cyclic loading can this 1950 vintage pipe withstand. We've got pipe, let's test it.
That's a fair call. The other thing is to have to discover in the last few years that some companies weren't quality controlling multi-$100 million, if not billion-dollar orders is just incredible. Now, it could be that they were just following the minimum standards, and what that tells you is the minimum standards introduced or changed by industry have got some serious weaknesses in them. So that's an area you want to look at. The feds are looking at this right now, and you might want to, but again, I think that's not your priority. There are some issues I commented earlier, probably from a regulatory perspective. That's kind of the engineers getting into the detail stuff, and at a regulatory level, you might want to guide them what to do. Maybe you want a process that says if you're putting in new pipe, it ought to be the grade you bought. All right? If it says X70, it's X70. That doesn't mean it's less strong than X70. It's X70 or better.
Very good. Mr. Fong?
Well, thank you for the education on the pipeline.
Probably more
very
than you want to hear.
Educational, thank you. You know, you probably have both the engineers have a good suspicion of what ignited the pipeline. So do you think you could speculate on that right now?
It won't be speculation. It's fact based on experience.
Yeah, or fact based on experience.
Does that help?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
The forces released on a gas pipeline rupture. Again, this is a low spectrum release. It's a 30-inch, but it was running around slightly less than 400. That's not a real high pressure. So that should raise some questions right off the bat. But you've seen the forces generated. It's got this huge crater. It's thrown, multi-ton, 100, pipe steel, 100 feet. That's the rupture dynamics of gas, compressible gas. Related to the pressures and the diameters of transmission. And so that's throwing out so much force. It can generate its own source of ignition because all this gas is being released and it's mixing with air. It can generate it for static. It can generate it because of sparking. It can generate ignition because it just hits an ignition source. That in itself is not a real important factor. I think what the issue is you had a rupture, and a lot of ruptures will explode and detonate and have these huge fireballs. That's pretty typical. That's a static or a standard analysis if you're a rupture expert. Not many people are, so don't feel bad about engineers not knowing stuff like this.
So, like in plain English?
It can generate its own ignition source. It means it'll detonate on its own.
So, I see.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm engineer techie.
Thank you. Yeah, how ignited? Yeah, it detonated on its own, right?
Well, we're not saying that's the case here, but it can. It can very easily do that. History has shown time and time again. You don't have to have a flame to ignite.
Okay. Mr. Bradford, and Mr. Fong, if it's all right, Mr. Bradford is going to lead.
The other engineer?
As to
Sure. With this much gas released, there is a high likelihood that it would self-ignite from the metal flying around. But also, anytime you spread gas over a neighborhood, it's going to find something. There's going to be switches, cars, everything. There's too many possible ignition sources for it not to ignite.
And in difference, there might be some survivors in the audience. I don't want, as an engineer, I can be fairly cold, so I apologize if I offend you. Is the nature of this dynamics, if you've ever been in one, and I have, is you can have multiple explosions. The clouds are so huge and turbulent. You'll see pictures of actually these events in real life situations. It's just, again, I don't want to scare people, but you can have multiple explosions. The heat radiation is so high. It's just an area you just want to really avoid. Stating the obvious, I apologize again if there's some people in the room.
Mr. Fong, Mr. Bradford has to unfortunately get an airplane in the next 30 minutes, so if he could ask his questions first.
My question only deals with, again, you mentioned the different grades of steel. Are there any new research going on, considered new products other than steel to transport natural gas? Any kind of research in that area?
The newer steels are quite tough. In other words, they can actually have a crack in them, but that crack's not going to grow. It's not going to take off catastrophically. But you have to use steel. There's really no composite that's going to take the kind of pressures you need to compress the gas into a reasonable, transportable gaseous fluid, if you will.
Mr. Fong?
Do you think these two incidences in San Bruno and Rancho Cordova are the proverbial canary in the coal mine and representative of things to come if we don't address the infrastructure vulnerabilities?
Who wants to go first? Yes.
I think we need to know exactly why it failed first before you can actually say that. But it's certainly going to indicate something. We have to know why that steel came apart.
It's been my experience in investigating many hundreds, if not thousands of incidences. Some I can't talk about, others I can. It's never been an accident. It's never been a single event. It's always been a series of multiple breakdowns. And I think I've given you some documentation. The volume is probably higher than you want to see, but those are analysis of, usually it's multiple breakdowns. Any one of those could have prevented it, but they become linked. It's kind of like the Space Shuttle Challenger. You looked at the seals. And
Exactly.
as we get more complicated, I'm not making light of those issues, but what I think is good about this process that's going on tonight and the people who are showing up, I know some of it's pretty intense. There's ways where you can move forward and make this place better. And that's a good thing. Now, if we act as adults, most of you will come to the idea, the anger is real valid and it's the reason to be there, but if you can set that aside, I always say that 90% of the people, when they get the right facts, will understand that people are trying to do the right things. And the local governments, take protecting their citizens very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. I do have a couple of, I'm sorry? Yeah.
The state takes it seriously, too.
The state takes it seriously.
I meant local government. I mean, that includes the states as well as the feds. I'm not belittling those, but as you worked at the local and state, yeah, I'm sorry if you thought I excluded you. I was thinking state, I didn't say.
Thank you. Mr. Bradford has an airplane to catch to his home in Los Angeles, so he'll be leaving now, but thank you very much, Stephen. A couple of questions. I had one. You talked about the smart pig. Well, if pigging, you mentioned it has certain limitations, and you indicated that if it were a weld or a defective weld or an aged weld or an weld with a air bubble or something in it that didn't hold, and that was the cause of the rupture, and you indicated that a pig would not determine that or identify that. What would and what could? So if it were determined that is the cause, how would that be solved in the future?
Sure. Pigs are getting smarter all the time. Currently, the pig technology uses ultrasonic sensors typically, and so you can measure thicknesses almost every inch, but you're still not going to pick up a crack in a weld. Future pigs will use eddy current, magnetic field type technologies, and they may very well pick up welds or weld flaws. So that's something that's probably coming, but not here yet. Hydro testing can pick up that kind of thing. We do have the caveat that there are some places in the line where you can't shut it down. So you do have to come up with another inspection method.
And I'd interject too that one of the reasons that smart pigging was listed as the preferred, if not one of the two main inspection assessment methods, was that the history of, if you have to go back to the history, part of the requirements and the regulations is they're trying to develop advancing technologies to make things safer. And if you'd looked at smart pigging for corrosion, general corrosion 40 years ago, it was in its infancy, but it's come a long way. So it's an ideal tool for general corrosion. They're even gotten better at some certain selective corrosions, but it depends on who's selling it, what the manufacturers and what the technologies is. So there is an objective to try to advance technology. So I don't want to undersell the capabilities of some pigs, but you have to match them to the right risk.
Well, you're raising a good question in terms of pig usage, and especially in this area, because it's my understanding that none of the peninsula through San Francisco has been pigged. And for a number of reasons that you heard earlier. My contention is that if the smart pig is a good use and a good inspection tool, it hasn't been used, and we've been told that it's because of the angles of the aged pipe and those times in the terms of the turns it would make, as well as the dissimilar sizing of the pipe. But I also contend if you look at this line, it runs, especially if you take line 101 down through this area, there are miles, would appear to be straight lines of pipe. Now, I've actually asked, in fact, Ashley Simpson from PG&E, when we inspected or walked over line 101 back in early part of November, I think November 4th, I asked for some type of a report as to, they knew, and I asked the question, they know exactly every inch of that pipe in terms of size and structure, angle, and are there areas of a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever it is, that could be pigged if that could give us more assurances for public safety and a safer evaluation. I haven't seen that kind of analysis or report back, and I'd like to see that because I think that's critical. And the reason it's critical is the reason that the pig has not been used, or the smart pig, because of those problems, or is it money? Or is it the cost of pigging because of the launch operation and then removing that pig at some other point? And I think that's the issue for me. If you can't do the entire system in one swoop, and I don't know if that's how it would be done, probably not, then it's certainly not cost effective to do smaller areas that would cost for that launch and other things. And I don't think that should be the criteria used or the condition, but to me that's an issue that we should look at. And would smart pigging work better in this area or not?
Well, I can only comment in the developing of the integrity management rules after some very serious, massive failures with multiple loss of life, near loss of cities, large chunks of cities. It was clearly understood that the regulation, the integrity management rule, and all the people in the room, and I'm going to focus on the gas transmission guys, that where we were heading was smart pigging, and that was 10 years ago. Now again, final rule didn't get promulgated in 2003. But it's clearly that the feds prefer developing and advancing smart pigging because it's just going to tell you more about your pipeline for a specific risk. And for those that are not captured, the technology can be advanced. 40 years ago, nobody ran smart pigs, and we're running them now, after hundreds of millions of dollars of application. So that's kind of the direction people want to be heading in terms of the regulatory environment. And what it looks like here is you're like 10 years behind the 8 ball, and now you're going to try to catch up in the next 5 or 10 years. That's a hell of a place to be. It's not like this wasn't coming, folks. This is not a surprise. Now, but in deference to being neutral here, you don't want to make the problem worse by saying go spend $1 billion to convert everything over. What's your plan and where's your risk? That's kind of the way integrity management works.
Sure.
Does that make sense? I mean,
yes, it does make sense.
Keep in mind.
I want to get to the citizens.
Pigging works very well, again, for new tough pipe, because new tough pipe is not susceptible to
that's a good point.
Flaws in welds because there are no welds. It's seamless pipe, so you have circumferential welds, and they can leak without breaking. So your biggest risk is general corrosion, so pigging works well there. And I suspect some of these long straight sections are more remote, and so they're not considered high critical areas, so it's not just money, it's quite a few decisions.
Question, would it be safer to rely on a more extensive system of smaller pipes with more redundancy in the system to allow for hydro testing for future pipeline systems, or replacing the old ones as larger pipes?
You want my management hat on now?
Whatever. Gas
is designed, I mean, the whole idea of transmission is bigger and higher pressure. That's the efficiency and the horsepower utilization. If you're going to put, 1,000 megawatts of power plant in, it's not going to run on a 12-inch. Okay, it's going to run on some big stuff. And somewhere you're going to have bigger pipelines, and people are going to encroach. And the philosophy is try to have an integrity management program, and then regulation can guide that to where you can kind of head where you need to be. We got to have the infrastructure to have modernization.
Okay, thank you.
In general, it's a nice idea to have lots of redundancy with small pipes, but that will cause more connections. Yeah. And one thing you will find with pipe and pressure vessel failures, connections are a weak point. So it's not that simple.
This says, for Rick and Glenn, do you believe inspections and risk management could be improved at CPUC and PG&E if their executive management were engineers? If so, why? Rather than bankers.
I have to work with engineers every day, and the answer is depends on the engineers and it depends on the management. I'm not criticizing. I don't know enough about that. I'm looking at the process. I'm not looking at the people, okay? I'm not here to hang anybody. I'm looking at the process, and as a person who does this for a living, I find troubling the evolution here, and it sounds like you're going to deal with it in some manner.
Right. All right. Thank you. Those are maybe you could stay there for a few minutes. I have a couple questions for PG&E and the PUC still. If Mr. Glenn, well, if PG&E is Kirk still here?
Yeah, he's outside.
Oh, he left? Okay. Kent, we'll put you up here and you can answer the question. I'm kidding. You know. I wouldn't do that to you.
Don't do that. No, it's not.
Okay, well, the question, and maybe someone does know, how old are the 3 pipelines in the San Bruno area? The 3 pipelines in the, I know, do you know that it is, I think we have 132 was in the 50s, and 101 was in the 30s when it was installed, and I don't know 109.
Yeah, 109 and 132, I don't know if this is still on it. 109
It's
and
on.
132, I think are roughly around the same time, so in the 40s and 50s with some replacements. 101 was built earlier as a line, and 101 is the one that goes right along the Highway 101 corridor. It was built for the first time earlier than that, but it's had a lot more replacement work on it, so different sections of it are much newer.
Okay, and while you're there, that'd be great. Is the PUC adding 4 inspectors or 3 inspectors and 1 supervisor?
And there are 4 inspectors. One of them, they're all going to be engineers. They're all going to be qualified to do this inspection. One of them will be the lead. It's called supervisor. Someone probably looked at our website, and it will be the lead of those folks. But they're all going to be out there in the field.
Okay, would you? These are questions that are probably for PG&E. One would be, how are couplings inspected and how often? That would be one, and we will, I've got the person's name and address. We'll make sure we get with PG&E to get that question answered. What type of inspections were performed in 2009 and 10 to 132 and current operating gas pipes in the Crestmore Park explosion residential area? Was there hydro testing done?
There was not hydro testing done that I'm aware of to 132 at any time near when we're talking about or ever that I know of. The kinds of inspections that happened on the line that went through the neighborhood, the one that blew up, are the ones that we've been talking about. The what's called direct assessment that's going out and checking with sensors, aerial flyovers, and people going along the right-of-way with detectors, with gas detectors.
Very good. I think that, here's one right here. Is greater regulations of the steel industry warranted to ensure the quality and rating of steel? With a maximum operating pressure of 400 psi, what is the overall rating of such a pipe? In other words, what is the safety factor between the overall rating and the operating pressure?
The safety factor is supposed to be at least 3. And so if the steel is specified correctly, you're going to be able to operate 3 times your operating pressure before you should expect failure. And that means you had some damage to this pipe. We just don't know what it is.
Can I jump in, guys?
Of course, Mr. Conley.
You know, when you mentioned the Golden Gate Bridge, I was on the district board there, and we did have a problem with steel. I think they had a contract in China, and I'm a little fuzzy on the engineering terms, but we did have to send it back. You think it was softer.
It wasn't as strong as it should be, or,
Right,
or
yeah.
wasn't as tough as it should be.
Yeah. They found bubbles, et cetera.
And porosity. Yes.
There were some comments that neighbors smelled a foul odor near the blast site. Does that tell you anything, or would it tell you anything?
Typically not.
After the blast?
It would have been before, I'm sure.
Yeah.
No.
It's very common for people to say they smelled gas. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. It's hard to use the information. Yeah.
Very good. Well, no more question. You had one more, the final question. No, thank you. Final 2 questions. How'd you sneak? All right. Isn't a failure of risk management? Isn't a failure of risk management not to do more hydro testing, not replace older welded pipes? I guess there's a question in there. Is that the question, John? That it's.
I see it as a failure of risk management not to replace older pipes and hydro check, do very little hydro check. Would that be your assessment?
Well, I'd step it a little different. I don't want to color your question. Is it a failure of risk management to have a rupture? Yes.
Right.
Okay, now the question is, how did that process break down, and what were the decisions to do that? And my suggestion would be it's in more than one area.
Well, I know
Okay.
it's more than one area, but in your opinion, was there a failure because those methods were not used? The replacement of older pipe, as they've been doing in Southern California in an aggressive program, and hydro checking, which you say is a primary measure of pipeline
Well, I guess I'd suggest, if I'm hearing right, the failure of choosing the hydro test, that's a management decision, and failure of the risk management process. To mandate the pipe be replaced, I think that's not a right way to characterize that. Just because the pipe was old doesn't mean it had to be replaced. That's my position.
Well, after it was a decision of Cal Edison to replace the pipes.
Different system. Yeah.
Program. Why did PG&E wait?
Okay,
Well,
thank
like
you, John.
apples and oranges. Sorry.
Sure. Thank you very much, and they'll be here for a few minutes afterwards, and you could certainly answer their questions. Please join me in the other question. I don't know if why so much secrecy about location and age and types of pipeline material? Is it against the law? No. And that's the question. And I don't know if Mr. Klein, do you want to answer that? Very good, thank you. I was thinking it was a PG&E question.
Yeah, it's not against the law. I think I said earlier, more transparency is better. You know a lot more about this pipeline system now than you did 90 days ago, than any member of the public did. So you'll find certainly you'll find the PUC supporting more transparency.
Thank you, John. And please join me in thanking our panelists for this panel as well as the previous panel for their great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So edifying.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you. And thank you all. I just wanted to thank everyone, and hopefully you gained a lot of information today. I want to thank Mayor Wayne, Vice Mayor Medina, Councilmember O'Connell, Councilmember Salazar and Ibarra, and City Manager Connie Jackson. And thank you all.